March 23rd, 2026. The dead of night in the Chicago suburbs. Inside a car parked near a forest preserve, a man is lying on his stomach and getting a massage from the mother of his children. What he does not know is that for the past 8 minutes there has been a firearm resting right beside him, pointed in his direction. This is Crete Township, Illinois. The woman is Jenna Strouble, age 30. She has one more stop ahead of her, his parents' house. And later, she will calmly tell detectives that she had considered a fourth target as well, but decided she would not be able to pull it off. How a quiet domestic disagreement over parenting turned into a methodical plan stretched out over several months. Let's walk through it step by step. March 23rd, 2026, 2 minutes past 2 in the morning. A phone in the Will County Dispatch Center in Illinois rings insistently and for a long time. On the other end is a woman from the neighboring state of Indiana. She says she has just gotten off the line with her sister, and what her sister said was impossible to ignore. The sister's name is Jenna Strouble. In her own words, she had used a firearm against 3 people. Who exactly, and whether they are still alive, she does not know for sure. The dispatcher passes the address to the Will County Sheriff's deputies. The address, Crete Township, an unincorporated area south of Chicago, a house somewhere in the 3400 block of East Norway Trail, a quiet street, private houses, the silence of night. When the deputies roll up to the house, the first thing they see is the front door standing wide open. The lights are on inside, but nobody comes out to meet them. The entryway is silent. The deputies step in and almost immediately find the body of a middle-aged man. He is near the dining area, and the scene around him shows that it all happened right here, inside the house. The deputies go back out into the yard, check the driveway, and notice a parked car, a black Ford Fusion Titanium, a 2014 model. Inside the cabin is a young man reclined in his seat, showing no signs of life. The door is closed, the windows intact, no signs of a struggle. Back inside the house, a little further from the first body, they find another victim, a woman. On first impression, a triple tragedy within one family on a single night. No screams, no kicked-in doors, no scattered belongings. As if someone had simply walked in, done what they came to do, and slipped away into the darkness. And then, already far from the scene, called their sister and told her half the truth. While the crime scene technicians in Crete Township are only just beginning to set down their evidence markers, 26 miles to the south, already across the state line, the police in the small town of St. John, Indiana, received the same information. The woman who called Will County had named her sister and given her address. The name, Jenna Strouble, age 30. Address, a private home in a quiet suburb. St. John is exactly the kind of place American news reports usually describe as a quiet suburb. Trimmed lawns, 2-story houses, schools within walking distance. In this town, Jenna is known as a young mother of 2 small children, a boy and a girl, 4 and 3 years old. The children's father is Jacob Lambert, 32, who lives on the other side of the state line in Illinois. The couple had met in 2020, lived together briefly, had 2 children back-to-back, and split up. The relationship never fully ended. Investigators would later describe it with the formula on and off, sometimes together, sometimes apart. Sometimes they met, sometimes they shared a household, sometimes they just exchanged silent text messages about the kids. What matters is that Jenna herself would later describe her role in those children's lives to detectives honestly and dryly, almost without emotion. By her own account, she did not have a close relationship with them. She spent little time with them. Custody, by her own admission, she had voluntarily arranged in someone else's name, not her own. From the outside, the picture is strange. A young mother living in a comfortable suburb who distances herself from her own children, and nearby live people who, on the contrary, are deeply involved in those children's lives. The father and his parents on the other side of the state line. And it is exactly around that line, who is closer to the kids, who is further, that everything that followed would begin to coil. And if Jenna keeps her distance in her children's lives, Jacob Lambert's family does the opposite. They stay very close. Jacob himself is 32. His mother is Stacy Ford, 54. Her husband, Jacob's stepfather, is Patrick Ford, 55. All 3 live in a private home on East Norway Trail, in that very unincorporated stretch of Crete Township, where, a few months later, patrol cars would come rolling up. From the way prosecutors describe the case, the Ford family is the classic support structure around the grandchildren. Grandma and Grandpa are constantly involved in the children's lives, driving them around, feeding them, picking them up from daycare, spending weekends with them. Jacob either lives with them or somewhere nearby, and his life is woven tightly together with his parents. For the two little ones, the house on East Norway Trail is as familiar as their own cribs. The photos that would later end up in case files show ordinary family scenes: holidays, birthday cakes, toys scattered on the floor. But inside this support structure, tension has been quietly piling up for a long time. The source of that tension is Jenna. According to investigators, she flatly dislikes the way Jacob treats the children. She dislikes the way they run the household. She is irritated by the role the Fords play, the fact that Grandma and Grandpa are woven so deeply into her son and daughter's lives. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary family conflict, the kind there are thousands of in divorced couples. Complaints about parenting, arguments over schedules, grudges against the mother-in-law, nothing that would have caught the eye of neighbors or a school counselor in the early stages. Just a quiet, sticky background of mutual resentment that drags on for months and that everyone around chalks up to ordinary post-divorce drama. That background is exactly the soil on which the plan will later take root. A plan is not born in a single night. It starts taking root long before March. 3 months before a black Ford Fusion would pull into the Ford's driveway, Jenna Strouble makes the first purchase that would later appear in the indictment. December of 2025. She buys a handgun, a Glock 19, compact, popular, one of the most common short-barrel models in the United States. The purchase is made legally by her own admission to investigators. Sometime after that, Jenna takes a second step. She orders online a device that reduces the sound of a shot. In American paperwork, it is called a suppressor. The case file lists a sum, around $589. It's important to understand that in the U.S., this is not a one-click purchase. A suppressor belongs to the category of items that require federal permits, separate registration, and background vetting. The process takes weeks, sometimes months. In other words, this is not an impulsive decision made in the heat of an argument. It is a long, paper-heavy, calm story. And here, for the first time, we see exactly what investigators will later be dealing with. Between the December purchase and the March tragedy, several months go by. All that time, Jenna leads an ordinary life, handles her own business, texts with Jacob, sorts out day-to-day things. And in parallel, in the background, she waits for the pistol and the sound-reducing device to finally come together into a working set. For the neighbors, for her sister, for Jacob himself, she is the same person she always was. But somewhere in her apartment, there is already something that was bought not for self-defense, not for the range, not for a collection, bought for a task. And that task was already spelled out clearly enough that the person did not mind walking through a long procedure, paying a decent sum, and waiting for every last piece of paper. That is why prosecutors would later speak not of a moment of passion, but of cold, drawn-out intent. Out of that cold intent comes the first message of March 22nd, Sunday, 2026, an ordinary day in the suburbs. The children are not with Jenna. She has a free evening. She picks up the phone and sends Jacob a short line along the lines of, "Let's hang out," just suggesting they drive around, spend some time together. For a man in an on and off relationship with her, that message does not seem unusual. They had done this before, just met up, gone somewhere, talked. Jacob agrees. The pair sets a time. Around 11:30 at night, Jenna pulls up in her car to the Ford's house in Crete Township, picks him up, and heads back out to the highway. For him, it is an evening with the mother of his children, possibly an attempt to patch things up, possibly a conversation about parenting or about shared plans. Nothing that would make him tense up or leave a note for his parents. But as he settles into the passenger seat and fastens his seatbelt underneath that very seat, literally half a meter from his feet, there is already a pistol. That same Glock 19, bought in December, with the sound-reducing device screwed on. Jenna herself would later tell investigators about that drive very directly. She was driving with the intention of harming him, meaning the moment her car pulled out of the Ford's driveway was not the start of a date. It was the start of execution, on the surface. Two adults driving at night along the highways south of Chicago. Inside, one of them does not know that this short stretch of road will be his last. That gap between the outward picture and the inner calculation becomes the central feature of the entire night. The gap between the picture and the calculation starts working in that very moment. The car rolls through the quiet streets of Chicago's southern suburbs. Jenna drives smoothly, without any jerks. They make it to the Plum Creek Nature Preserve, a large green area with forest, trails, and parking lots. At this hour, the preserve has long been closed, the gates and lots empty. Around them, darkness, a few scattered streetlights, not a single random figure on the road. Jenna pulls over to the shoulder on Burnham Road in the small neighboring town of Sauk Village. She shuts off the engine, and she tells Jacob she has a little surprise for him. She says she wants to give him a massage. In the investigator's retelling, this scene sounds almost domestic. She asks him to recline the passenger seat, take off his shirt and his baseball cap, and lie face down. Jacob agrees. There is nothing in that request that throws up warning signs for him. He has known her for a long time, knows her body, her voice, her manner. In the context of an on-and-off relationship, a moment like this reads like an attempt to grow closer, not a threat. He reclines the seat, takes off his shirt, settles in, face down. Jenna climbs over from her side and sits on top of him, pressing her knees in. She starts the massage. By her own testimony, this part lasts about 20 minutes. 20 minutes in silence, in a car on the shoulder, next to the closed preserve. Her hands move along his back, his shoulders, his neck. From the outside, it looks like a very personal, very intimate scene between two people who know each other well. If a stranger's car had driven past at that moment, the driver would have decided that the couple in the parked sedan were just working through something of their own and looked away. But those 20 minutes Jenna would later describe without a single word about closeness. For her, it was not a scene. It was a careful entry into the next phase of the plan. The next phase begins quietly. At some point during the massage, Jenna lowers one hand down under the passenger seat and pulls out the Glock 19. The weapon is already ready to fire. Her other hand keeps moving along Jacob's back, slowly, steadily, just as it did a minute before. He is lying face down, eyes closed, relaxed, seeing nothing. By her own statements to investigators, she holds the weapon right next to him for about 8 minutes. 8 minutes is a very long stretch of time if you try to measure it with your hands. In that span, a person could ask herself a dozen questions and make a dozen decisions. But she does not. She keeps up the massage, possibly talks in a normal voice. Jacob does not turn around. He does not sense what is right beside him, does not hear the breathing of the person above him. He believes the scene. Then it happens in one movement. Inside the closed cabin, the sound is muffled. Jacob dies in the passenger seat of his own car. He never manages to understand that an evening he had taken for a simple meeting with the mother of his children had been laid out as a final period. At that point, by the logic of any ordinary story about jealousy or domestic drama, it all should have ended. One victim, one hidden car, one attempt to flee. But what Jenna does next shows that she sees what is happening inside a completely different frame. For her, March 22nd is not yet over. The main thing, as she will explain herself later, still lies ahead. And instead of turning around and disappearing, she drives back. The same car, the same night, the same pistol in her hand. Jacob remains where he is in the passenger seat. Jenna slides behind the wheel and pulls the car back out onto the highway. Her course, the Ford's house. That same house on East Norway Trail from which she had picked Jacob up a little over an hour ago. Inside, his mother and stepfather are asleep. Or maybe not yet asleep. The drive does not take long. Crete Township is a quiet area. At night, the roads are nearly empty. Around midnight, her car pulls up to the familiar driveway. She parks the vehicle at a convenient angle and stays put with the weapon in her hands. Later, when investigators piece the routes back together, a separate detail will appear in the case file. Jacob's own car, registered in his name, ends up parked less than a block from Jenna's house in St. John, Indiana, meaning the nighttime logistics of this story were thought out not on the fly, but well in advance. Patrick and Stacy Ford, inside the house, are still living in ordinary reality. They do not know that their son is never coming back. They do not know that the woman they never loved as a daughter-in-law is right now standing on their porch with a loaded gun. For them, in this minute, The world is still normal. A lamp is on, the TV is running. Somewhere in the kitchen is a half-drunk cup of evening tea. There is not a single warning signal in the house, and that is the most chilling part of this setup. Outside, a person who has just calmly shot the father of her children, gripping the handle of the front door. Inside, two people still sure that the worst thing that can happen tonight is a bad dream. What happens next takes minutes, but in its consequences becomes the central scene of the entire case. Patrick Ford walks up to the front door and opens it. Most likely he is expecting to see his son, or maybe a neighbor who has come to the wrong house. Instead, he sees Jenna in front of him, and he sees a weapon pointed at him. According to prosecutors, Jenna opens fire while still on the porch before Patrick has time to understand what is happening. She walks into the house without lowering the gun. The indictment lists 17 hits. That figure stands out on its own throughout the whole case. It does not mean one or two aimed shots, and it does not mean a panicked burst in some random direction. It means the shooter did not stop once there was no resistance left. This is not self-defense. This is not an accident. It is a methodical, cold-blooded execution of a thought-out plan. At the noise, Stacy Ford comes down from the upper part of the house. The sound is muffled by the suppressor, but the clatter of shell casings and the footsteps inside the house can still be heard. She steps out onto the staircase to see what is going on. On the lower steps, she is met by the same woman with the same weapon. A few shots. Stacy ends up next to her husband. The house goes silent. Neighbors on the street would later say they heard nothing unusual that night. That is exactly what the suppressor, bought online for hundreds of dollars, was for. When the deputies walk into this house a few hours later, they find a scene that Jenna herself, on the phone with her sister, had not yet been able to describe precisely. She had said she used a firearm against 3 people and did not know if they were alive. While the neighbors sleep, Jenna walks back out of the Ford's house onto the porch. She does not bother closing the door behind her, which is why, when the patrol cars arrive, they will find it wide open. She gets into her car, pulls off East Norway Trail, and heads in the opposite direction, back into Indiana, through Crete, through Sauk Village, through the suburban interchanges, across the state line. Roughly an hour on the road at night, no traffic, no witnesses. At home in St. John, she has all the time in the world to do what criminals usually do in movies and in real criminal cases. Get rid of the weapon, burn the clothes, wash the car, drive to another state, swap out the phone, craft an alibi. She does none of that. The Glock 19 stays with her. So does the suppressor. Clothes, shoes, traces on her skin, all still on her. Jacob's car sits parked not far away, essentially pointing to her address for anyone who cares to look. Instead of fleeing, she picks up the phone and calls her sister. The wording in the case file is almost childlike in how dry it is. I used a firearm against 3 people. I don't know if they're alive. Not, I was defending myself. Not, I was attacked. Not, it was an accident. Just, I shot 3 people. Her sister, who ends up in the same room as that call, does what a normal human being would do after hearing something like that from a loved one. She calls the police. That call is what launches the official side of the case in Will County at 2:01 in the morning. From that moment on, Jenna stops being just a young mother from a quiet suburb. She becomes the central figure in one of the most talked about cases of the spring of 2026 in the Chicago suburbs. And it seems she understands that better than anyone else. Very shortly after her call to her sister, local Indiana police cars pull up to Jenna's house in St. John. They already know why they are coming. Their Illinois colleagues have managed to pass along information about the triple scene on East Norway Trail. The officers have every reason to expect resistance. A person who, by all accounts, has just used a weapon 3 times can behave in any way at all. She behaves differently. The door opens on its own. Jenna Strouble, a 30-year-old woman in ordinary clothes, calm, appears at the threshold. In her hand is a bag. She walks up to the officers and hands them the bag. Inside is the loaded Glock 19 with the suppressor attached. That same set that had been assembled back in the winter and had waited a long time for its moment. No struggle, no attempt to hide anything, no claims of self-defense. She hands over the weapon the way people hand over a lost item they have found. She is detained, handcuffed, placed in the car. Already at that moment, while scanning the surroundings, the patrol officers notice a black Ford Fusion Titanium, a 2014 model, parked nearby. The car is registered to Jacob Lambert. With that find, the investigation finally ties one thread together: the body of the young man in Crete and the car in Indiana. From that point on, the picture of what is happening stops assembling itself into a domestic conflict or a robbery gone sideways. In front of law enforcement stands a person who bought the weapon in advance, bought the suppressor in advance, wrote the victim, "Let's hang out" in advance, drove to the preserve, went back to the house, drove across the state line, called her sister, and handed over the weapon without any resistance. No panic, no flight. Only a calm and frightening sequence. The calm sequence continues during the interrogation. Unlike many suspects in serious cases, Jenna does not go silent and does not hide behind an attorney in the first few hours. She tells investigators quite a lot, and this will later become the foundation of the indictment documents. She confirms that the trip of March 22nd had been planned. The pistol under the passenger seat is not a coincidence. The "let's hang out" text is part of the setup. When she was pulling out of the Ford's driveway with Jacob next to her, she was driving, in her own words, with the intention of harming him. Asked about her motive, she answers in the same level tone. She did not like how Jacob treated her children and his. In her own formulation, her grievances with him as a father became the point around which the entire conflict turned. Investigators press further. Why Jacob's parents? The answer is recorded in the documents almost word for word. She did not want custody of the children to pass to Patrick and Stacy after Jacob. To the direct question, "Is that the reason?" she answers, "Those are some of the reasons." And here the logic she lays out begins to fall apart at the first touch. She talks about the children as the center of everything. At the same time, she herself had admitted earlier that she does not maintain a close relationship with them, that she spends little time with them, and that she had arranged custody voluntarily under someone else's name. It turns out that a woman who had consciously stepped back from her own children's day-to-day lives suddenly builds a triple plan for the sake of controlling their future. And that control is expressed not in getting closer to them, but in removing the people who are truly close to them. In her version, it all looks connected. In reality, that connection hangs by a very thin, almost illusory thread. That thread becomes even thinner when, in the same interrogation, Jenna herself adds a detail her defense would probably not want to see in the transcript. She admits that she had considered causing harm not only to Jacob's parents. According to her, her thinking had included, in parallel, another scenario involving her own parents. The logic she voices along with that repeats the earlier scheme. She did not believe her children would be safe and in good hands with her own parents either. Meaning, in her picture of the world, every adult to whom the children could have passed after her actions automatically fell into the category of threat. Her parents, Jacob himself, all of them, in her view, were bad guardians. But then comes a line that makes this part of her testimony especially hard to read. She says she did not think she could have pulled it off and walked away unpunished. That is no longer morality. That is pure calculation. A person does not say, "I couldn't raise my hand against them. I love them. I didn't want to hurt them." The person says, "I did the math and realized that in this particular case the numbers would not add up, and so I did not go through with it," which means that in her head there was not a single impulse, but a list. 4 potential targets: the father of her children, his mother, his stepfather, her own parents. In reality, she stopped at 3, for purely technical reasons: whom she had time to get to without getting caught, and whom she did not. For the investigation and for the court, this detail becomes the most important one. It turns the story from a flare-up in a relationship into something far colder and more systematic. That systematic quality is what forms the backbone of the charges. After her arrest in Indiana, Jenna signs a waiver of the extradition process. Usually in interstate cases, this process can drag on for weeks. Attorneys argue over technicalities. The suspect sits in a local lockup. Jenna chooses the short route. She is moved across the state line fairly quickly and delivered to the county jail in Illinois. Officially, the case is handled by the Will County Prosecutor's Office. She is charged with 9 counts of first-degree intentional murder, 3 per each of the 3 victims. This practice in the American system makes it possible to lock in different legal bases for the same act, so that the charges are harder to dismantle at trial later. On April 10, 2026, her first official appearance takes place in the Will County Courthouse. She enters a plea of not guilty on all counts. In the American system, such a plea is almost always entered automatically and is not tied to whether the accused had admitted things to investigators before. It is not a denial of the facts, but a starting procedural position. Around the same time, the defense reaches for a special mechanism, the Safe T Act. This Illinois law allows some defendants to await trial not in a jail, but at home, without bond. The idea behind the law is not to hold behind bars those who do not pose a real threat. Jenna's defense asks that this mechanism be applied to her as well. The prosecution pushes back hard. Placed on the judge's desk are details that are difficult to turn away from. A massage in a parked car, a weapon prepared in advance, 8 minutes of waiting, 17 hits in an attack on an elderly man, a separately discussed scenario involving the defendant's own parents. Against that backdrop, words about minimal threat to the community ring hollow, and the judge agrees. The defense's motion for pretrial release under the Safe T Act is denied. Jenna Strouble is to be held in custody without the right to post bond until the end of the trial. The core argument of the court is stated briefly and to the point: the severity of the charges and the objective danger to those around her. Given that the materials include not only 3 victims, but a plan for a 4th spoken aloud in her own words, there was, in essence, no other position the court could take. The details start spreading across local and federal media. A nighttime massage by the shoulder near a forest preserve, a long wait with a gun in hand, an attack on an elderly man right at the front door, a list of 4 potential targets, the calm handover of the weapon on her own front porch. Each of these elements on its own would already turn the case into a loud one. Together they make it one of the most talked about proceedings in Chicago's suburbs this year. Family photos of Jacob, Stacy, and Patrick run across the news feeds. Ordinary snapshots from ordinary life that now illustrate a very different storyline. No one lives in the house on East Norway Trail anymore. For 2 small children, 4 and 3 years old, everything that had been their foundation collapsed in a single night. Father, grandmother, and grandfather, the people who carried them through their days, are now only in photographs. Guardianship over them will be decided without Jenna and without those she herself had labeled threats. And the case itself leaves a question that the investigative materials do not answer. How, in the life of a young woman from a comfortable suburb, did such a quiet, methodical plan, stretched over months, grow unnoticed? How did irritation over parenting turn into the purchase of a weapon? How did the purchase of a weapon turn into a text saying, "Let's hang out"? And why, at every one of these steps, was there no one beside her to look her in the eye and ask, "What exactly are you about to do?" On the morning of February 24th, 2020, a woman from Winter Park dials 911 and, in a calm voice, tells the operator that her partner is dead. The body is inside a zipped suitcase, right in the middle of the living room. Her version of events involves a drunken game of hide-and-seek and an accidental nap upstairs. But on Sarah Boone's phone, investigators will later find 2 short night videos. On them, Jorge Torres is heard calling out to her from inside the suitcase, begging for air. And her voice will answer with 2 lines that a Florida prosecutor will later call a voice from the grave. What exactly did the camera capture that night, and why did the trial drag on for almost 5 years? The morning of February 24th, 2020, begins in the suburbs of Orlando, the way thousands of other mornings begin in Florida. Winter Park wakes up under a soft sun. Sprinklers hiss in the yards. Neighbors walk out to their cars. Inside one of the townhouses, a 911 line starts ringing. On the other end is a woman's voice. It is even, almost routine, as if she were talking about a broken faucet or a lost key. The woman introduces herself, Sarah Boone. She tells the operator that her partner is dead. Then she adds a detail that changes the dispatcher's tone. The body is in a suitcase, right there in the living room, on the ground floor of the house. The operator asks her to repeat, confirms the address, asks her to stay on the line. Sarah repeats what she said in the same voice, without a tremor. A few minutes later, Orange County patrol cars and an ambulance pull up to the house. The officers walk into the living room and see exactly what the caller described. On the carpet stands a large black suitcase on wheels, the kind people take on long vacations. The zipper is closed all the way around. Inside, folded up, lies a man. Jorge Torres Jr., 42, Sarah's partner. No signs of life. While forensic technicians photograph the scene, Sarah herself stands off to the side and quietly explains her version of events to the officers. That evening, she and Jorge had drunk some wine and invented a game, something like hide and seek. He decided to hide inside the suitcase, and she zipped it up as part of the joke. Then, according to her, she went upstairs, lay down for just a minute, dozed off, and slept until morning. When she came back down, she found him like this. The detectives listen, nod, take notes. But in their eyes, there is already a question they don't say out loud. This is far too calm a morning for a story like that. That very morning crashes into a neighborhood where no one was expecting police cruisers or forensic technicians in white coveralls. The couple has been renting the townhouse in this area for several years. 2 floors, a small yard, windows facing a quiet street. The neighbors know Sarah, but don't really talk to her. She is 42, worked in sales and customer service, picked up side jobs, switched companies. Jorge is also 42. He is short and slim, noticeably smaller than Sarah in both weight and build. Next to her, he looks almost fragile. People who knew them describe them as an ordinary American couple, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, with periods of warm walks together and periods of drawn curtains. Alcohol shows up in their house often, bottles of wine on the table, hard liquor in the cabinet, shared evenings with music. Inside the house, a familiar routine, a living room with a couch and a television, a kitchen, a staircase up to the second floor where the bedroom is. In a corner of the living room stands the spot where suitcases usually sit before a trip. And that is exactly where, on that fateful night, the black suitcase sits. There is nothing threatening about it on its own. It is luggage like any luggage, the kind you see by the millions at any train station. The night of February 24th looks from the outside like just another weekend. None of the neighbors hear shouting. No one calls the police. The doors are shut, the curtains drawn. Life in the neighborhood goes on as usual, right up until Sarah's morning phone call. And it is that silence that will later become one of the most unsettling details of the case. Because behind the closed doors of that house, another world had been unfolding for years. A world in which 2 heavy drinkers would make up, then fight, then call the police on each other. And on that night, that world shrinks one last time, down to the size of a single suitcase on the living room floor. The silence behind those curtains is deceptive, and the Winter Park police know that better than any neighbor. Sarah and Jorge have a long history of shared breakdowns. They have been together for several years, and the relationship has been unstable from the start. In July of 2018, the police came to their house on a report of an assault. According to the account given then, Sarah had grabbed Jorge by the throat during an argument. She was detained and charged with assault with attempted strangulation. But the case was later dropped. The evidence was thin, the statements were confused, and Jorge himself did not press the matter. In parallel, there was another line. Over several years, Jorge himself had been detained 4 times on reports from Sarah about physical confrontations. Each time she told the police about pressure from his side. And each time he was taken away, she was the one who posted bail and brought him back home. People who knew the couple described their bond with one phrase: fight, then reconcile. They would split up, then come back together. They would drink together, get jealous, scream at each other, then post shared photos online. In some stories of domestic conflict, it is hard to say who is the victim and who is the aggressor. Sometimes those roles switch every week. That is exactly what happened with Sarah and Jorge. By February of 2020, the relationship was stretched to the breaking point. Behind them, both were prior charges, police visits, temporary separations. Both were exhausted, both were on edge, and both kept living under the same roof. Later, the prosecution and the defense would interpret this history in opposite ways. The prosecution would see in it a road toward a deliberate act. The defense would see a classic cycle of mutual pressure, inside which, they claimed, Sarah was becoming more and more afraid of her partner. But for now, in February 2020, it still seems to both of them that this argument will end like all the others, with a reconciliation and a shared bottle of wine. This night will end differently. A few hours after the police arrive, Sarah is taken to the Orange County station. She is placed in an interview room with a table in front of her and detectives across from her. The camera is rolling. Every word is on the record. Sarah holds herself together. She cries sometimes, but quickly pulls herself back. Her version of events goes like this. On the evening of February 23rd, she and Jorge are having a quiet dinner at home. They open wine, then another bottle. By her account, they both drink a lot, and the mood is playful. At some point, the conversation turns towards strange games. According to her story, it is Jorge who suggests trying to hide inside the suitcase, for laughs, on a dare. Sarah, she says, goes along with the joke. She zips it up from the outside and says she is going to step away for a minute. Then, according to her, she goes upstairs to the second floor. She lies down on the bed, meaning only to close her eyes for a couple of minutes. But the alcohol does its work, and she falls asleep. She wakes up in the morning, does not immediately remember the game from the night before, walks downstairs, and finds her partner motionless inside the zipped suitcase. The detectives listen carefully. They don't argue, they don't push. They ask clarifying questions. Exactly how much was drunk? Around what time did he climb inside? When did she go upstairs? Sarah answers, sometimes getting confused with dates and times. Her version sounds strange from the very first minutes. A grown man, even one very drunk, is unlikely to voluntarily climb inside a closed suitcase knowing that he will be sealed in from the outside. And even if he did, for 1 second, he would try to get out immediately. But the detectives don't say anything out loud yet. They simply gather her story in every detail, and they sign a warrant to seize her personal phone. Sarah's phone is sent to the digital forensics lab. There, specialists create a full image of the device. Gallery, messages, apps, deleted files. They peel it apart, layer by layer. And inside that digital archaeology, they find 2 short video clips, filmed on the very night of the tragedy. The first hit is the timestamp. The date and time line up exactly with the stretch when, by Sarah's own account, she was already sleeping peacefully upstairs. This is not older footage, not vacation clips. This is the night of February 24th, recorded inside the house, in the living room. The investigators open the first clip. The camera is pointed down. The frame shows the floor, the carpet, and the familiar black suitcase on wheels. The zipper is closed, the suitcase is rocking slightly. A muffled male voice comes from inside. Jorge is calling Sarah by name. He asks her to open it. He says he can't get enough air. Off camera, her own voice is heard, short, clipped, without a hint of panic. The second clip is a little later, filmed from the same angle. Jorge speaks again, this time more insistently, his breathing clearly strained. Sarah answers again. Between the 2 recordings, there is a gap in time. That means that after the first plea for help, she deliberately pressed the button again, sometime later. The digital forensics team confirms the main point. The videos are not edited, not spliced, not altered. These are original files shot by a smartphone camera in real time. Their existence completely destroys Sarah's original version. It is impossible to be peacefully asleep upstairs and to be filming 2 videos in the living room on the same night. From this moment on, the investigation moves down a different track. There is no more hide and seek. There are 2 files, and they will show not only the detectives but also the jurors what actually happened in the house. And now, the central question of the investigation grows harder. Why film something like this on a phone at all? The answer to that question lies inside the recordings themselves. The investigators watch them dozens of times. Transcribers write down every word. The picture that emerges is grim. In the first video, Jorge's voice is already strained. He asks Sarah to unzip the suitcase. He calls her by name. He speaks calmly, but his breathing is labored. In response comes a line from her that every major American outlet will later quote. She tells her partner, "This is what I feel like when you cheat on me." Sarah says it without anger, in an even voice, in an almost routine tone. In the second clip, he turns to her again. Again he asks for air, asks her to open it. And again he gets an answer. This time her line is shorter and harsher. "This is what you do when you choke me." Between the lines, there are short laughs. Not a hysterical fit, not a cracked voice, but actual little laughs, the kind of reaction you give to a bad joke. The total length of both clips is under 2 minutes, but in those 2 minutes, more is captured digitally than in all the previous interviews and reports combined. For the investigation, these recordings become the spine of the entire case. For the prosecution, the main argument about Sarah's state that night: not panic, not fear, not a random incident. A calm voice, a tally of grievances, a reminder of past quarrels. Later, one of the Florida prosecutors will call these recordings a voice from the grave, because on them, Jorge is speaking to Sarah for the last time, calling her, asking her. The defense will search for an explanation for those lines for years: alcohol, trauma, altered consciousness, battered partner syndrome. All of that will be heard in court. But the recordings themselves will remain unchanged. They cannot be re-edited, cannot be replayed differently, cannot be disputed. They are 2 short files, and on them are captured both Jorge's last words and Sarah's real tone in that moment. When the content of the videos lands on the investigator's desk, there is no more doubt. After the interview, Sarah is formally arrested and charged with a serious felony, initially 2nd degree. In American law, that means intentional killing, but without a plan worked out in advance. Not a cold calculation set up weeks ahead, but an act committed with full understanding of the possible consequences. She is transferred to the Orange County Jail. Bail is set high, and Sarah's family cannot post it. She stays behind bars and prepares for trial from inside. The news quickly spreads beyond Florida. Local television stations run short segments, but the national networks pick them up. Within a few days, the story is in the country's biggest outlets. The headlines all sound roughly the same. The woman with the suitcase, the Florida couple, a deadly game of hide and seek. They are short, sticky formulas that will cling to the case for years to come. Jorge's family gives the first interviews. His relatives demand justice and a strict sentence. Photos of Jorge spread across social media. A smiling man in vacation snapshots, someone who looks nothing like a person you would expect at the center of a story like this. The trial is scheduled for the coming months. On paper, the case looks relatively simple. There is video evidence, there are autopsy findings, there is the statement of the accused herself. The prosecution counts on a quick process, but reality will turn out differently. Between the arrest and the final sentence, almost 5 years will pass. That road will turn into a drawn-out marathon of conflicts, changes of counsel, and postponements. On the surface, the delays will be blamed on the pandemic and hurricanes. Underneath, they will come from Sarah herself, who will, over and over, derail any stable path through her own trial. And it is that delay that will show just how central the character of the main defendant really is. That character shows itself before the trial even starts. Between 2020 and 2024, 8 defense lawyers passed through Sarah's case. 7 of them are court-appointed, meaning free of charge to the defendant. With each one, the same picture repeats. The lawyer takes the case, studies the materials, proposes a strategy. After a while, Sarah starts to clash with them. She files complaints, demands replacement, tells the judge that the attorney does not suit her. The court accommodates her and provides another. The story repeats. By 2024, the system's patience runs out. Judge Michael Kranick issues a ruling that is rare for Florida. He declares that Sarah is effectively abusing her right to free legal representation. She cycles through lawyers endlessly, slows the process down, and blows deadlines. As a last resort, the judge strips her of the right to a public defender. From that point on, she either has to hire a lawyer out of her own pocket or represent herself. Sarah chooses the second path. She begins preparing to represent herself, reading through paperwork and writing motions. That is an unusual situation even in serious cases. In July of 2024, she sends a letter to the court. Inside, a text and a hand-drawn sketch. In the sketch, something like an advertisement for attorneys. Sarah has drawn the silhouette of a lawyer by hand and is asking someone to take on her case. This appeal becomes known to the press. The story about the hand-drawn ad lands in the local papers. Among those who read it is a private attorney named James Owens. He decides to step in. He takes on the defense despite all the tangles and the looming trial date. His motivation is the challenge. The case seems impossible, but it is cases like this that make a lawyer's name. A few months remain before the first session. In that time, Owens needs to build a line of defense, prepare his client, and, most importantly, answer the question troubling everyone around him. Did Sarah deliberately try to drown her own case in delays? James Owens enters the case as Sarah's last real chance to soften her fate. He is a professional. He reads through the materials quickly, and he understands immediately that his client's position is extremely weak. The video recordings are devastating. The hide-and-seek version will not survive a serious attack, and the couple's past will work against her. In a situation like that, an experienced attorney starts looking toward a plea deal, and Owens approaches the state's attorney. He proposes changing the charge. Instead of a second-degree felony, a lighter classification, manslaughter. That is a different legal space, where the punishment is far less severe. In exchange, Sarah would plead guilty under the lighter formulation. The prosecution consults Jorge's family. In the end, the idea of a deal is put on the table. Specific numbers are laid out. 15 years in prison instead of a possible life sentence. For a woman in her early 40s, that means a real chance of someday walking free again. Not in her youth, but not in old age either. Owens brings the offer to his client in jail. He explains the math of the risks. The trial will almost certainly end in a harsh verdict. 15 years is less than what any peer of hers faces with this kind of evidence. But Sarah refuses, categorically, with no visible hesitation. She insists on her innocence. She says she does not feel like the person the prosecution is describing. She demands a full trial, a jury, and the chance to tell her own version. Owens accepts her decision, even though he understands where it can lead. He has only one thing left to do: build a defense that will give the jury at least one reason for doubt. He chooses the line of battered partner syndrome. It is a doctrine under which a person who has lived for years inside a cycle of pressure reacts to threats in a distorted way. It is a difficult line, but it is the only one still available, and it is that line that Owens will take into the courtroom in October. On October 14th, 2024, in the Orange County Courthouse in downtown Orlando, the trial the press has been waiting on for more than 4 years finally begins. The room is packed with reporters, relatives, and spectators. Court TV carries a live broadcast. Millions of people across the country tune in. By the time the process starts, 2 major delays have already passed. One was because of the pandemic, which froze Florida's court system for a long stretch. The second was because of Hurricane Milton, which scrambled the state's court calendar. Now, there are no more delays. A jury is chosen, 6 main members and several alternates. Selection drags on, with each side using strikes to remove candidates. The seats are filled by people who promise to judge the case only on the evidence presented, not on the headlines from the news. The prosecution from the very first sessions leans on concrete proof. The phone videos, the autopsy results, the photos of the scene, the detective's testimony. The prosecutor lays out the timeline of that, night minute by minute, and shows the jury how weakly the accidental version holds up. The defense comes in with a different strategy. James Owens speaks not about one specific night, but about years of mutual tension inside the couple. He cites past episodes, recalls Jorge's arrests, and describes the cycle which, in his telling, Sarah had been living inside. A special moment in the process is Sarah's own decision to take the witness stand. She walks up to the microphone and speaks at length under questioning from both sides. Her speech is emotional, in places disjointed, in places strikingly restrained. Details in her account shift from question to question. She sometimes describes the same events with different words. The jurors watch every gesture, every change in her voice, every pause. They already know that, in this case, there is a second Sarah, the one speaking on 2 nighttime videos. And the question for them becomes very simple. Which of these 2 Sarahs is closer to the truth? The answer to that question is born in the courtroom on the day the prosecutor plays both videos. The lights are dimmed, the screen is lowered, the sound comes through the speakers. The jurors hear Jorge's voice, muffled by the heavy fabric of the suitcase. He calls Sarah, asks her to let him out, says he can't get enough air. The recording is short, but the feeling inside the room stretches out. Several jurors look away. Jorge's family, in the front row, sits with their heads bowed. Sarah looks straight ahead, motionless. The prosecutor stresses that time passes between the 2 clips. That means that after her partner's first request for help, Sarah does not open the suitcase. Instead, she films a second clip. and she answers in a voice that contains no panic. The defense builds its answer on a longer distance. James Owens speaks about battered partner syndrome. He cites the history of Jorge's previous arrests on reports from Sarah. He describes in detail the cycle of pressure, which, according to the defense, his client was caught inside. A psychologist brought in by the defense explains to the court that people who have lived in such an environment for a long time can react to threats in distorted ways, not always adequately. They can smile, laugh, or say strange things in moments of real danger. The prosecution counters on every point. Its main argument is the laughter on the video. It is not the laugh of a frightened person, not hysteria, not a psychological breakdown. It is a steady, short, almost collected sound. The kind of laugh that accompanies one's own joke, not a reaction to danger. Sarah, in her testimony, takes a third path. She says she does not remember filming those clips. She admits she was very drunk, acted on autopilot, and has lost large parts of that night from her memory. And here the prosecution raises the most uncomfortable question for the defense. How can you twice deliberately film the same suitcase from the same angle if you remember nothing and are not in control of your actions? To the video evidence, the prosecution adds another layer, the forensic medical findings. The medical examiner takes the stand and begins to speak in a calm, technical voice. The cause of Jorge Torres's death was a lack of air in an enclosed space. There was no direct pressure on the neck. The body inside the suitcase was in a folded position, which in itself made breathing harder. The examiner explains to the jury that the process does not take seconds. In his estimate, it takes a considerable amount of time, well beyond a few minutes, during which Jorge remained conscious for some of the time. In addition, there are marks on the body consistent with a blow from a blunt object. The prosecution links them to a bat that the forensic team found in the house. According to the charges, before Jorge ends up in the suitcase, he is struck with that object. That adds another detail to the story, one that fits poorly with the version of a playful game. The defense challenges the link. Owens insists the marks could have a different origin, and the object itself has no direct biological traces on it. The examination partly supports his doubts. But the overall picture for the jury is heavy. There is a closed suitcase. There is a long stretch of time before death. There are 2 videos in which Jorge calls for help, and Sarah answers in short lines. There are signs of a blow. There is alcohol. There is no single piece that would break the prosecution's version. For the defense, it is a bad configuration. For Sarah, it is almost a verdict. One chance remains. A long jury deliberation, inside which doubts might appear. But even that chance will turn out to be short. On October 25th, 2024, both sides deliver their closing arguments. The prosecutor reminds the jury one more time of the sequence of events. The defense makes one last request to see Sarah not as a calculating aggressor, but as a woman broken by years of a heavy relationship. The judge gives the jurors their instructions. They go back to the deliberation room. In trials at this level, a jury sometimes deliberates for days. In a case with a complex body of evidence and a long process, a lengthy discussion is what you would expect. But in Sarah Boone's case, that rule does not apply. The jurors return the same day, in less than a single working stretch. For a case with this much profile, that is a short turnaround. The jury foreman rises and takes the verdict slip in hand. The room goes still. The decision is unambiguous. Guilty. The classification, second-degree felony. An intentional killing, without a plan made in advance, but with full understanding of the consequences. At the moment the verdict is read, Sarah sits with her head lowered. Her hair partly covers her face. Her shoulders are tense. She does not sob out loud, but her movements make clear that the blow was a hard one. Next to her stands James Owens. He keeps a hand on the back of her chair and says nothing. Jorge's relatives in the courtroom hold back tears. One of them quietly nods. Another covers their eyes with a hand. The formal part continues. The judge announces that the sentencing date will be scheduled separately. That is a standard procedure. Between the verdict and the sentence, time must pass for the paperwork to be prepared and for both sides to be heard. The defense immediately signals its intent to demand a new trial. That too is a standard move, but in this case, it looks more like a formality. The chances of a reversal are small. The question now is not whether there will be a sentence. The question is how heavy it will be. In the American system, second degree in cases like this can range from long prison terms to life. The judge has a range to work with, and how Judge Cranick uses that range will become clear in December. On December 2nd, 2024, the same courtroom is full again. Sarah is given her chance to speak freely. Her statement turns out to be long. She talks about life in jail, about her health, about how hard these years have been. She accuses the system of bias, complains about the conditions of her detention, and asks the judge to take her circumstances into account. Her voice sometimes cracks, sometimes sounds almost calm. She talks about the past, about Jorge, about herself. At some point, her words drift away from direct remorse, and everyone in the room notices. Jorge's relatives also speak. Their statements are short. They talk about the man they lost and about what is left of the family after that night. They ask the court to hand down a sentence that will show that their loved one's life was something more than an item in the news. Before the sentence is read, the defense files one more motion. It asks for a new trial, citing various procedural points. Judge Cranick denies it without a long discussion. The reasoning is simple. None of the cited circumstances affected the fairness of the trial. Then he moves to the main part. The judge reads out the sentence: life in prison, without the possibility of early release. That is the upper limit of what is possible under this classification. There is a short pause in the room, then a collective exhale. Sarah will be sent to a Florida State Correctional Facility. There she will spend the rest of her life. Legally, the defense still has paths for appeal, but the chances of success are considered low. The story that began with a morning 911 call almost 5 years ago is officially closed with this sentence. In that time, it managed to become one of the most talked about cases in the state, and its final punctuation becomes not so much the punishment of one person as a symbol of how the modern system handles a death inside a home. After the sentence, the case takes on a new life. Now, not in courtrooms, but in the media, in podcasts, and in professional discussions. The court TV broadcast of the trial drew millions of viewers. The session recordings are available online. People re-watch the key moments in the evenings the way others watch a series. Sarah Boone's case is discussed on major true crime podcasts. Documentary makers are planning films. Magazines publish long features, and legal columnists break down the defense strategy. Two opposing viewpoints emerge. Some see in the story a classic case of a calculated act disguised as a drunken game. For them, the main piece of evidence is the videos and Sarah's tone on them. Others look at the same story as the tragedy of two broken people, not one aggressor and one victim, but two adults who spent years dragging each other down. Specialists in domestic pressure argue over the limits of battered partner syndrome, where an explanation for distorted behavior ends and an abuse of the term in court begins. The recordings from Sarah's phone become some of the heaviest evidence of the decade. Florida prosecutors use the case as a teaching example of how digital evidence changes the course of cases involving deaths inside a home, of how short files on a smartphone can outplay a carefully built defense, of how things filmed for yourself come back as testimony in a courtroom. For ordinary viewers, the story leaves behind one simple thought. The phone in your pocket records almost everything, and if aggression switches on inside a house one day, there is a high chance it will end up on camera. For Sarah Boone, that rule worked in full force. 2 nighttime clips, filmed by her own hand, became the center of the prosecution. For Jorge Torres, those same files turned out to be the last form of his voice anyone heard after his death. It is on that crossroad that the case remains, inside the chronicles of American crime. In 2011, Nancy Brophy, a writer from Portland, publishes a short piece with the headline, "How to Murder Your Husband." In 2018, her husband, Chef Daniel Brophy, is found dead inside the culinary school where he taught. The trial runs 7 weeks. The prosecution has no weapon, no witnesses, and no direct evidence. All they have is $1.5 million in life insurance, a gray minivan caught on traffic cameras, and a digital trail that the writer herself left behind, month after month. This is a story about how words on paper collided with real life, and how circumstantial evidence added up to a life sentence. June 2nd, 2018, Portland, Oregon. Early Saturday morning, the city is still empty. Only a few cars on the streets. Inside the Oregon Culinary Institute, a private cooking school in the center of town, The lights come on in the long windows of the ground floor. At exactly 7:22 in the morning, Daniel Brophy, a 63-year-old chef and instructor, presses his key to the alarm panel and disarms the system. He always arrives first on Saturdays to get the teaching kitchen ready for class. Daniel has worked at the school for more than 15 years. His students say he rarely raises his voice and has a gift for making complicated things simple. Today is a regular class. Fish butchery, the basics of sauces. On the workbench, he lays out knives, pulls out cutting boards, turns on the water in the big metal sink. He stands with his back to the room, leaning over the basin. At that moment, 2 gunshots ring out in the kitchen. Daniel slumps to the floor between the stove and the workbench. The clock reads about 7:25. Inside the school at this moment, there isn't a single student, not a single colleague, not a single camera pointed into the classroom. The first students arrive around 8:15. They see the open door, the lights, the running water, and a body on the floor. One of them calls emergency services. Another tries to reach Daniel's colleagues by phone. Paramedics and patrol officers arrive. Attempts at resuscitation lead nowhere. Portland detectives tape off the block and begin their sweep. The register hasn't been touched. Not a single kitchen knife is missing. The locks are intact. The windows are closed from the inside. There are no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no strangers' fingerprints on the doors. It's as if someone walked in, knew exactly where Daniel was standing, and fired immediately. The investigators exchange glances. They already sense this is not a run-of-the-mill robbery. This is not a run-of-the-mill robbery. And from the very first hours, detectives begin looking at people from Daniel's inner circle. The closest person to him is his wife. Nancy Crampton Brophy, 68 years old, lives with him in a house on the outskirts of Portland. They've been together for 27 years. To everyone who knows them, they're a quiet couple. He's always in the kitchen, she's behind her laptop in the study. Nancy is a writer, not a conventional one, not someone you'd find on bookstore shelves, but a self-publishing author. She puts out romance novels that she uploads herself to online stores. The covers feature tense couples, dangerous men, plots about money and jealousy. The titles speak for themselves. The Wrong Husband, The Husband Hunter, The Wife Who Disappeared. Print runs are small, the income is modest, but she has a narrow circle of devoted fans and her own column on an author's website. In 2011, she publishes a piece there that will later travel around the world. The essay is called How to Murder Your Husband. It appears on a site for authors of mysteries and romance novels. The text is short, written with a touch of irony, but at its core it's a discussion of how a woman in a fictional plot might get rid of her spouse and not get caught. The author runs through motives: money, boredom, another man. She dissects literary devices and explains why some look naive and others look calculated. Now, in June of 2018, Nancy gets the call about her husband's death. She drives to the school. The officers who speak with her in those first hours will later all say the same thing. She's composed, she speaks clearly, she doesn't cry. A family acquaintance will recall that Nancy moved too quickly to talking about the funeral and the paperwork. For the investigators, this isn't evidence yet, just a mental note. For the investigators, it's still just a mental note, but they're already starting to piece together a first theory. In the first 24 hours, Daniel Brophy's case is treated as a possible robbery. The culinary school sits in a neighborhood where random thefts do happen, and police run that scenario by default. Detectives canvass the owners of nearby shops, pull street camera footage, and interview the institute's students and staff. Within a few days, this theory falls apart. Nothing is missing from the school. The cash register still has its bills. Daniel's wallet is sitting on the side table. His phone hasn't been touched. Knives and equipment are all in place. The shots were short and precise. The shooter didn't scramble around looking for valuables. The picture looks much more like a planned visit to one specific person. So investigators widen the circle and look at those around him. Daniel has no enemies. His students and colleagues speak of him warmly, without a hint of conflict. He has no debts to outsiders, no gambling habits, no shady ties. That leaves family, and first of all, his wife. Detectives request the couple's financial documents. The picture that emerges is unexpected. Daniel has about 10 insurance policies in his name: life insurance, accident insurance, survivor benefits. The beneficiary on all of the main policies is Nancy. The total payout in the event of his death comes close to $1.5 million. For a modest family living on one salary, that is an enormous sum. At the same time, the couple is in debt. The mortgage is past due. The bank is threatening to sell the house. Credit card balances are slipping into the red. Investigators look at this combination, big policies, heavy debts, a calm wife, and realize the case isn't accidental. The circle around Nancy Brophy is starting to tighten, even though no one is calling her a suspect out loud yet. The circle around Nancy is tightening, and at this moment, her own text bursts into the story. Portland journalists are the first to notice an odd detail. The dead chef's wife has an author's website, and on it sits an essay with a loud headline, "How to Murder Your Husband." The title surfaces in the first days of the investigation and instantly spreads through the American news. The essay was written back in 2011. Nancy publishes it on a platform for authors of mystery and romance fiction. The text is short, under 1,000 words, but built very concretely. She opens by admitting that she thinks about this a lot as an author. Then she runs through plot options, insurance, an outside hitman, the heroine doing it herself. She reasons about who, in stories like these, usually gets exposed and why. She writes that women in such plots give themselves away through emotion and poor planning. The author gives advice on how to appear to those around you afterward. Don't sob too hard. Don't rush to cash in the policies. Don't look for a new man too soon. The text contains no names, no specific situations. Formally, it's a writer's reflection on the tricks of the genre, but in the context of Daniel's death, the essay reads very differently. A few days after her arrest, someone notices that the text has vanished from the website. Archives preserve old copies, but the original has been deleted. Investigators attach those screenshots to the case file, though they understand. Using the essay in court will be risky. The defense will easily argue that a writer has the right to fantasize, and that thoughts are not the same as actions. In the end, the text will not become the main piece of evidence, but it will forever color the case. For the public, for the jury, for journalists, Nancy Brophy is from now on the woman who first wrote in detail how to kill a husband, and then found herself at the center of an investigation into her husband's death. For the jury and the public, Nancy is now the woman with the scandalous essay. But investigators aren't looking only for words. They need numbers. And the numbers for the Brophy family turn out to be grim. Detectives get access to bank statements, mortgage papers, and insurance documents. The picture comes together quickly and ruthlessly. There is, essentially, only one income. Daniel teaches at the culinary school and does private consulting work. It's a stable but hardly enormous salary. Nancy's books sell poorly. Her novels bring in sums that don't even cover the basic bills. In recent years, she's been asking her husband more and more often to cover her expenses on his card. The debts are piling up. The couple has about $25,000 in overdue credit card payments, several months of missed mortgage payments. The bank is already sending letters threatening foreclosure. Their house in the Portland suburbs, where the couple has lived for many years, is at risk of being sold off. For Nancy, this isn't just a place to live. It's her workspace and the backdrop of her whole lifestyle. At the same time, investigators study the insurance policies. There really are about 10 of them. Some were taken out long ago, others in recent years. A few of them Nancy added or rewrote after serious financial trouble had already set in. On all the main documents, the sole beneficiary is herself. The total payout in the event of Daniel's death exceeds $1.5 million. A few weeks after the funeral, Nancy begins filing claims to collect this money. The requests go out to different companies almost simultaneously. The insurers, seeing that the murder case is still open, put the payments on hold. Several policies are frozen until the investigation is complete. Investigators take note of this move. The money on its own isn't proof, but combined with the essay and with Nancy's calm demeanor, it adds a third layer to the picture. A motive appears, and it looks very solid. The motive looks very solid, and investigators move to the next step, searching for the weapon. They request Nancy's internet history, data from her provider, receipts from gun shows, and correspondence with sellers. What they find flips the case on its head. Starting in November of 2017, Nancy Brophy persistently researches the topic of self-assembled firearms. Her search history contains dozens of queries on the same subject: how to assemble a pistol without a serial number, how to buy individual parts, the registration rules in various states. In the United States, such a weapon is called a ghost gun, a literal phantom. It's put together from separate components and can be owned legally without any registration. In early 2018, she orders a self-assembly kit for a Glock. The package arrives at her Portland address. Soon afterward, she drives to a gun show in the suburbs and buys a factory-made, legally registered Glock there. It gets entered into her documents. One might think that for a writer who, as she'll later explain, is researching material for a new novel, that would be enough. But Nancy goes further. Separately, through another platform, she buys a replacement barrel and a replacement slide for the Glock. These are the key components of the pistol, and they determine the results of ballistic analysis. Investigators note that such a set of purchases is rare for someone who just wants a gun for home storage. Investigators pull all these orders into a single table: dates, receipts, shipping addresses, transaction numbers. They also check her search queries about pistol handling and about possible weapon inspections. This whole digital chain becomes almost the main piece of evidence for the prosecution. It shows not an impulse, but calm preparation stretched out over months. And the one doing the preparing is a person who will soon become a widow. The preparation is being done by a person who will soon become a widow. And now, investigators need to answer the second question. Was she actually there that morning? At first, there's no physical evidence of it. There are no cameras inside the school pointed at the kitchen. There are no witnesses. The one person who could say for certain, who walked up behind him, will never tell the story. But in 2020, detectives returned to the traffic camera archives. The technology now lets them run through thousands of hours of footage and filter out minivans of the right color and model. Nancy Brophy drives a gray minivan, a distinctive vehicle, not the most common in this neighborhood. When investigators narrow the search, they get a series of brief clips. At around 7:22 in the morning, on June 2, 2018, this minivan pulls up to intersections a few blocks from the culinary school. It's heading toward the Oregon Culinary Institute. On one of the cameras, you can see the car slowing down at a turn near the building. At 7:29, the same minivan is already moving back the other way, away from the school. That gives exactly the window during which Daniel was killed. 13 minutes. Enough to park, enter the building through the service door, fire 2 shots, and leave quickly. From the Brophy home to the school is only a few minutes of driving on quiet streets. When investigators ask Nancy about it directly, she doesn't deny the trip, but she says she was just out driving to think and to get some air, that she likes morning routes, that she didn't want to disturb anyone. Why she never mentioned this drive in her earlier interviews, she cannot explain. And why her route coincided precisely with the time of her husband's death, she can't explain that either. For the prosecution, this footage becomes the second major piece of evidence after the weapon story. They have a motive. Now they have opportunity. The prosecution has motive and opportunity, and that's enough to move from observation to action. On September 5th of 2018, exactly 3 months after Daniel's death, several Portland police cars pull up to the Brophy home. Nancy steps out onto the porch. Her rights are read. The warrant is presented. The arrest goes quietly, without resistance. Neighbors watch as a woman in a light blouse is placed in the back seat of a patrol car. That same day, she is formally charged. The wording is intentional killing of a family member with the use of a firearm. Under Oregon law, this is a severe charge. The court denies bail. For a 68-year-old writer, that means she'll be waiting for her trial behind bars. In the first interviews, Nancy behaves evenly. She fully denies any involvement. She says she loved her husband, that they had plans for a vacation, that they were going to write a book together about his career. When investigators show her the weapon purchases, she answers with a carefully prepared line. It was material for a novel. A writer has a duty to know her subject. When they ask about the minivan's route, she explains that she likes morning drives and doesn't remember the details. Her attorneys immediately argue that the case is built on guesswork. There is no direct evidence, no weapon, no witness, no fingerprints, no gunpowder residue. They ask for the trial to be postponed so they can unpack each digital clue separately. The case really does drag on for a long time. First, because of the volume of forensic work. Investigators are going through terabytes of correspondence, photos, and recordings. Then comes the pandemic of 2020, and the courts in Oregon nearly shut down. The trial is rescheduled several times. In the end, Almost 4 years pass between the arrest and the start of the hearings. All this time, Nancy Brophy remains in jail. She writes her lawyers long notes, drafts possible answers, rereads the case files. She is planning to testify herself. And in April of 2022, she gets her chance. The trial begins in the Circuit Court of Multnomah County in Portland. A modest courtroom, bailiffs, a long prosecution table, Daniel's family in the front row. Journalists and bloggers film the empty hallway before every session. The case has already become a national story. Morning shows, podcasts, and book communities are all talking about it. The hearings last 7 weeks. More than 50 witnesses take the stand in turn. Culinary school students, Daniel's colleagues, bankers, insurance agents, employees of gun shops, digital forensics experts. Each one adds another fragment to the overall mosaic. The prosecution builds its case on 3 pillars. The first pillar is motive. Prosecutors walk through the financial hole the Brophy family was living in. Debts, overdue payments, the threat of losing the house, and right next to that, the $1.5 million in life insurance that was supposed to go to Nancy after Daniel's death. The second pillar is opportunity. On a large screen, the jurors are shown a map of Portland with the traffic cameras marked. On that map, Nancy's gray minivan approaches the school precisely at the moment of the shooting and leaves again within minutes. A video analysis expert walks through each second. The third pillar is the weapon. The jurors see a detailed printout of her internet history, the searches for self-assembled firearms, the purchase of the assembly kit and of a factory Glock, and separately, the barrel and the slide. Specialists explain exactly how those components affect forensic testing. The defense chooses a different path. Their strategy is to blur the picture. The attorneys emphasize that no one saw Nancy with a weapon in her hands. No one heard her threaten anyone. No one recorded her inside the school. The internet searches, they remind the jury, can be read as a writer's research. The minivan in the neighborhood is just one car on the city's streets. A minivan on the streets is just a car, the attorneys repeat. And at some point, the defense gets a real chance to turn the case around. That chance is tied to the bullet analysis. For the prosecution, this is the most vulnerable spot, and the defense knows to strike exactly there. A ballistics expert takes the stand. He has the bullets recovered from the scene of Daniel's death and the firearms investigators found in Nancy's possession. He explains how a pistol leaves a unique mark on a bullet. Every barrel has its own pattern of rifling on the inside. When fired, the bullet is literally signed by that weapon. The expert runs the comparison. None of the Glock pistols seized from Nancy Brophy match the marks on the bullets found at the scene of her husband's death. Not one of the guns found in her home is the murder weapon. For several seconds, the silence hangs in the courtroom. In any ordinary case, a finding like that would mean acquittal. The defense seizes the moment. The attorneys demand that the charges be dropped for lack of a central piece of evidence. They turn to the jurors. If the prosecution can't show the weapon, then the whole structure collapses. But the prosecution pushes back. They remind the court of the spare barrel and spare slide that Nancy bought separately. According to the prosecution's theory, those parts could have been used and then removed, in which case the pistol left with Nancy would no longer match the bullets from the scene. Investigators searched the Brophy home down to the last corner. The spare barrel and slide were never found. The judge leaves this question up to the jury. He does not dismiss the case and does not side with the defense. Now it will be up to 12 people in the room to decide. Can you convict someone when the weapon has not been found, and all you have are traces of preparation and circumstantial coincidences? At this moment, the picture looks shaky for the prosecution, and Nancy Brophy makes a decision that will surprise even her own attorneys. She wants to take the stand herself. In American trials, a defendant is under no obligation to testify. The defense almost always advises silence. Any word from the defendant can be used against them. But Nancy insists. She believes she knows how to tell a story, and this is precisely the skill she needs now. She walks to the stand in quiet clothing, with neatly arranged hair. She speaks softly, without hurrying. She talks about how she and Daniel met, about their years together, about their plans for a joint book. She describes the vacation they were going to take together. In her account, everything looks even and homey. She explains the weapon purchases. According to her, she was working on a new novel in which one of the heroines had to know how to handle a pistol. She wanted to understand the details so the text would feel authentic. About the replacement barrel and slide, she says she just got carried away with the subject and bought too much. About the drive on June 2nd, she says she doesn't remember the exact route, but that she often drives those streets. Then comes cross-examination. The prosecutor works calmly, without pressure, but very methodically. He lays her own letters, receipts, and statements in front of her. Whenever she makes a claim, he pulls out a document that says otherwise. Cracks start appearing in her story. She gets confused about the dates of purchases. She changes details of the routes. On the same morning episode, she gives different versions. The jurors watch as the composed writer, who at first came across convincingly, gradually grows less certain. Her own testimony, meant to be her salvation, is working in the opposite direction. Each new day on the stand adds weight to the prosecution rather than takes it away. By the time she leaves the witness stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom has shifted. The doubts left behind by the bullet analysis are now partly outweighed by her own contradictions. And the jurors retreat to the deliberation room. 12 people receive the judge's instructions. Review all the evidence, assess the degree of certainty, vote unanimously. On their tables lie printouts of internet history, camera maps, financial documents, interview transcripts. Deliberations last about a day and a half. On May 25, 2022, the jurors return to the courtroom. The clerk reads the verdict. Guilty, unanimously. The wording is intentional killing of a family member in the second degree. Under Oregon law, that means a sentence which the court will determine separately. Nancy listens to the verdict standing, with no outward reaction. Her face remains calm, almost detached. Journalists will later write that it was precisely this composure in the courtroom that became one of the most talked about moments of the trial. Daniel's family weeps in the front row. On June 13th of the same year, the court announces the sentence. The judge reads out the decision, life imprisonment. He adds that the earliest Nancy Brophy will be allowed to seek parole is 25 years from now. For a woman already past 70, that is effectively a sentence for the rest of her life. Before the sentence is announced, Daniel's relatives speak. His son from a previous marriage speaks about a quiet, kind man who lived for his work and his students. He calls his father a man who never wished anyone harm. He asks the court to consider how many students lost their mentor. Nancy is also given the right to a last word. She briefly delivers a few phrases, again insisting on her innocence. When she is led out of the courtroom, a printout of her statement remains in her hand. The spectators leave in silence. A 4-year process has ended. A case that began as a mysterious morning in a culinary school has become one of the most talked about verdicts of the year. One of the most talked about verdicts of the year does not end in the courtroom. The story of Nancy Brophy travels far beyond Portland and turns into a major media wave. Her name lands on the front pages of the biggest American publications. Reports run on CBS, on CNN, on morning shows. The case is discussed in book clubs, in true crime podcasts, in programs about behavior and psychology. The Oxygen Channel releases a full documentary breaking down the trial. The A&E Network adds its own version to a series about unusual cases. CBS produces a separate special. The creators carefully reconstruct the timeline, show fragments of the hearings, run interviews with Daniel's students and colleagues. In every project, the central symbol is the same. That very essay, How to Murder Your Husband. The essay, which Nancy herself had removed from her own site, spreads across the internet once again. Users copy it out of archives, dissect individual phrases, hunt for overlaps between her advice and her behavior in real life. For lawyers, this text becomes a textbook example of how creative material can be used against its author in the context of a criminal case. A separate discussion unfolds around self-assembled firearms. Journalists explain what a pistol assembly kit is and why its circulation raises questions for the police. After the Brophy case, Oregon and several neighboring states consider new restrictions on the sale of such kits. Federal rules are also tightened. For Daniel's loved ones, the story doesn't end with the sentence. They set up a memorial fund at the culinary school, establish a scholarship in his name, support students who can't afford tuition. Former students come to the ceremonies and talk about him as if he had just stepped into the back room to grab some ingredients. The Nancy Brophy case makes its way into textbooks and courses on working with circumstantial evidence. It becomes a classic example of how motive, opportunity, and a digital trail together can stand in for a missing weapon and a missing witness. Florida, Lake Seminole, December of the year 2000. A young real estate appraiser named Mike Williams heads out for a duck hunt on the morning of his 31st birthday. Only an empty boat and a live dog come back from the water. The police quickly close the case as an accident and even name the culprits: the cold December water and alligators. His wife Denise collects a large insurance payout and a few years later marries his best friend. And 18 years pass like that. Then, in one family blow-up in the year 2016, a single detail slips out, and this tidy Southern story falls apart. This is a case about a secret that stayed quiet for far too long. Tallahassee, the capital of Florida, looks in the early 90s like one big southern suburb. Green streets, neat houses, a church on every corner, university campuses, and Baptist communities where everyone has known each other since childhood. This is exactly where, back in high school, Denise Morell and Mike Williams meet. They come from different schools, but they quickly end up in the same circle of friends. A young couple, calm parents, a shared church, shared friends. A few years of dating later, around the mid-90s, they take the next step. In 1994, Denise and Mike get married. He is 25, she is the same age. The wedding follows the usual Southern playbook: a big church ceremony, relatives from both sides, friends from their school years. The newlyweds buy a house and start a life in full view of their whole circle. Mike works as a real estate appraiser, driving out to houses and land plots, writing up reports for banks and insurance companies. Denise lands a job in banking and handles financial products. At the end of the 90s, the couple has a daughter. For everyone around them, Denise and Mike now become the picture-perfect family. They show up at church together, celebrate holidays together, turn up at birthday parties for the kids of mutual friends. Mike is into hunting and fishing, an ordinary story for men in his circle. He has a big crew of friends with whom he regularly heads out to the lakes and swamps. But one person stands closer to him than all the others: Brian Winchester. They have known each other for years, going back to their student days and their early years in Tallahassee. Brian is the best man at Mike's wedding and, by community tradition, the godfather to their daughter. He works as an insurance agent. He has good connections, an easy personality, a knack for being at the center of any group. From the outside, it all looks like a classic middle-class success story in the American South. A strong family, a loyal friend, stable work, a regular church life. But toward the very end of the 90s, a crack begins to appear in this tidy picture, and so far no one close to them has noticed. This crack has a specific starting date. From 1997, a secret affair begins between Denise Williams and Brian Winchester. Everything is set up so that spotting it is almost impossible. They are constantly crossing paths anyway. The same church, the same friends, joint family dinners, business matters around insurance products and real estate. Meetings on the road, short pauses between work appointments, trips under the pretext of insurance consultations. Inside that routine, it is easy to hide an affair. Mike suspects nothing. To him, Brian is his best friend, the godfather of his daughter, a business partner, a man he can trust with any document and any conversation. Brian's wife Kathy also has no idea. They keep visiting each other as couples, taking family photos together, planning joint outings. From the outside, four people bound tightly by friendship. On the inside, a secret that is slowly slipping out of control. According to material that will be heard in court many years later, the relationship between Brian and Denise becomes obsessive. This is no longer just an affair, but a deep dependence on each other. More and more often, they talk about a shared future, and that is where they hit a wall. Denise is deeply religious. Her family and her circle are Baptist, with a hard line on divorce. For her, leaving Mike means destroying her own world, losing her place in the community, possibly even losing access to her daughter. In this picture, divorce is not considered an option. According to Brian, this mindset is exactly what opens the door to talk of another scenario. If divorce is impossible, then Denise has to end up alone some other way. At first it sounds like sick fantasies. Later, it turns into working out the details. An option involving a staged car accident comes up. They drop it as too risky. Other scenarios get discussed, and they all revolve around hunting, water, and Mike's solo trips. Where fantasy ends and a plan begins is already hard to tell from the outside. Conversations about hunting and water move into practical territory in the summer of the year 2000. Mike Williams takes out a new life insurance policy. The amount? $1,750,000. For a young middle-income family from Tallahassee, that is a huge sum, far from normal practice. The policy is arranged personally by Brian Winchester. He is the insurance agent, he holds the license, he knows how to explain why a young father needs exactly that kind of coverage. The beneficiary listed on the policy is Denise as the spouse. On paper, everything looks transparent. The husband is taking care of his wife and daughter in case anything happens to him. Mike is healthy, young, has no chronic illnesses, no risky profession, no debts that would push him to rush into coverage like that. To any outside observer, the deal looks like caring about the family's future. Brian smoothly steers around all the internal checks at the insurance company. The policy is issued without any noticeable questions. There is one detail that will become key many years later. The policy contains a standard clause. If the insured passes away within a short period after the policy is issued, usually the first year, the payout can be strictly limited or canceled entirely. It is a safeguard against anyone trying to cash in on insurance quickly. Under the terms of this particular policy, that protective period expires only by December of the year 2000, meaning right around winter, the policy starts paying out at the full amount. Mike Williams dies literally a few days after that period expires. Between the signing of the policy and his death lies exactly the interval after which the insurer is obligated to pay out with no reservations. To Mike, it all looked like a reasonable way to take care of his family. For Brian and Denise's plan, the policy becomes the financial foundation. Without that money, any further life in full view of all of Tallahassee would quickly become impossible. The insurance is precisely what turns the vague talk of another scenario into cold calculation with a specific date. That date is December 16th, the year 2000. For Mike Williams, it is a special day. He turns 31. But instead of a birthday breakfast with his family, he gets up before dawn and drives out for a duck hunt. Lake Seminole, a man-made reservoir on the border of Florida and Georgia, is one of the most popular spots for duck hunting in the region. On an early December morning, the water is cold. There is mist in the air, and the trunks of flooded trees stick up near the shore. A typical place, a typical hunt. Nothing that would set this morning apart from dozens of others. According to the official version that the police receive in the first few hours, Mike leaves alone. It makes sense. Lone men with a boat and a dog on Lake Seminole in December are a common sight. In reality, as Brian Winchester himself will describe many years later, that morning he is out on the lake together with Mike. To Mike, it looks like an ordinary joint hunt with a close friend. To Brian, it is a planned trip onto the water. The two of them climb into Mike's boat and head out from the shore into the deep part of the lake, to a spot where other hunters cannot see them. At some point, near one of the flooded trees, Mike goes overboard. The December water cramps his muscles. Mike is wearing heavy hunting waders, tall, waterproof boot pants that normally keep a hunter dry in the reeds. According to Brian's plan, it was all supposed to look like an accident, an empty boat and a story about a man who drowned in the cold water. But nothing goes according to plan. Mike is not the type to panic. He manages, right there in the water, to unfasten the waders and pull them off. Lighter now, freer, he makes it to the nearest submerged trunk. He holds onto a branch, tries to catch his breath, shouts for help. He still does not understand what has happened. He thinks he slipped in on his own and that his friend is about to save him. He does not know that in those very seconds, Brian is making an entirely different decision. In those seconds, Brian Winchester realizes that the first scenario has failed. The waders did not work. The man in the water is alive and can see his friend right there. If he backs off now, everything falls apart. The policy, the secret relationship, their old lives. According to the testimony he will give many years later, this is the moment he makes the final decision to go all the way. He turns the boat around. There is a weapon on board, something that is not explained by any casual trip. By his own account, he does not move in right away, as if giving himself time to push past his doubts. Then, he uses the weapon. Mike goes under and does not surface. Brian quickly takes the boat away. Then he carefully covers his tracks. Mike's empty boat is left to drift in a spot where other hunters will easily find it. The dog is left on shore. Brian himself heads back to Tallahassee by the usual road, trying not to cross paths with anyone who might remember him. He comes into town as if out of nowhere, just a family friend who had his own morning. Closer to midday, Mike's empty boat really is discovered on the lake. An alarm goes up. His dog is found on shore, alive and frightened. The waders are gone. There is no body. A massive search begins. The Gadsden County Sheriff brings in divers, volunteers, private boat owners. Lake Seminole is combed for days. Nothing. No jacket, no shotgun of Mike's, no signs of a struggle. With no body and no witnesses, investigators are left only with what is on the surface: an experienced hunter, an early morning hunt, a single man in a boat, December water, heavy gear. The version forms on its own, and very quickly. Not one of the investigators in those days asks the most important question: why people are so eager to believe this particular picture. Because the answer to that question sounds a little too convenient. Searches on Lake Seminole run for several days, then shrink down to rare patrol sweeps. The body is not found. The investigators' version from the very start is simple. Mike Williams fell out of the boat into cold water, the waders filled up, and they dragged him to the bottom. An experienced hunter, yes, but the water does not forgive mistakes, especially in December. A second part is quickly tacked onto this version. If the body is not recovered, then most likely the alligators got it. For northern Florida and Georgia, that sounds almost convincing. Lake Seminole is known for a large alligator population, and the local press eagerly picks up the detail. Within a few weeks, the line about alligators in the newspaper columns becomes almost official. Acquaintances, neighbors, and sheriff's office staff repeat it. The story takes on a sense of closure. Only many years later will zoologists and investigators point out that, in mid-December in this region, alligators are barely active. They go into a kind of dormancy, eat almost nothing. Their metabolism slows down. The alligator version, at that time of year, does not square with biology, but in the year 2000, details like that have no effect on how the investigation is handled. No one in charge orders a deeper look. A case with no body, no witnesses, and no clear evidence is easier to close. A few months later, Mike Williams is officially declared deceased on paper. The case is classified as a hunting accident. There is no criminal investigation. No one seriously questions Brian Winchester. He is just one of the friends, not someone who went out with Mike that day. Denise Williams files her paperwork for the insurance payout. The documents are put together flawlessly. The insurance company requests a death certificate, receives it, and begins preparing the payout. And only one person refuses to accept this tidy version. That person is Mike's mother, Roberta Williams. She cannot spell out to investigators everything that unsettles her, but deep down, she does not believe a single word of the official picture. Roberta Williams's gut feeling quickly turns into systematic work. She becomes the central person who refuses to let this case quietly slide into an archive. She calls the sheriff's office, the county prosecutor, regional newspapers. She shows up for appointments with investigators, pushes her way into conversations with their supervisors. Not one call, not two, for years, with almost no breaks. Her arguments are simple and do not come across as the emotions of a grieving mother. Mike was a very experienced hunter. He had been on the water since childhood and knew boats. He never went out on the lake without a life vest under his jacket, especially in December water. He is not the kind of man who stupidly falls overboard. His dog was found on shore, alive. His waders are missing. None of these details fit the accident story, and Roberta is ready to repeat them at every meeting. She is also troubled by her daughter-in-law's behavior. In those first days after Mike's disappearance, Denise, as Roberta describes it, is strangely quiet. She barely takes part in the search, does not show up on the shore, does not press friends for information, does not give interviews to local outlets. That is not a crime in itself, but it stands out. A few years later, when Denise starts a relationship with Brian Winchester, the best friend of her late husband, for Roberta, this becomes the red line. She tells investigators openly, "Take a look at this couple. Something is not right here. Roberta does not stop at phone calls. She builds a memorial website for her son, hands out flyers, drives around neighboring counties looking for witnesses. Every year in December, around the anniversary, she brings the story back into the local press. Reporters get used to her name. So do the police. They call her persistent, sometimes annoyingly persistent. But her work produces exactly the effect that is needed. The Mike Williams case never gets shut for good. It hangs in the air, moving from one investigator to another, waiting for its moment. How many more years it will take before she is finally heard? Nobody in the early 2000s can answer that. While Roberta keeps fighting for attention, Denise Williams' life drifts in the opposite direction. In the year 2005, almost 5 years after Mike's death, Denise marries Brian Winchester. By this point, Brian has managed to divorce his first wife, Kathy. For people around the couple, a lot becomes obvious in hindsight. Those who had watched them together at family dinners for years now remember the looks, the short trips, the strange pauses in conversation. Everything is now falling into a picture that no one had wanted to see before. By this time, Denise has received the payout on Mike's insurance policy. Under the terms of the contract, the sum is large. Part of the money goes to ordinary expenses and to their daughter's life. Part goes into a new family life with Brian. The couple buys a house, furnishes it, lives in plain view of all of Tallahassee. They go to church, meet with acquaintances, celebrate family occasions. To many people, this no longer looks like a scandal, but like a normal middle-aged American couple. For Roberta and the people close to Mike, this marriage lands like a slap in the face. But officially, there are no legal barriers to the wedding. A former daughter-in-law is marrying her son's best friend. Neither of them has been charged or even placed under suspicion. The police and the prosecutor's office are not yet ready to openly say that they see a motive here and a potential conspiracy. The marriage is registered, and Denise Williams becomes Denise Winchester. Time passes, and the happy life does not materialize. Denise and Brian live under one roof, but inside this family, grievances, tension, and fear pile up. They know more about each other than anyone else in this town. For each of them, their partner is not just a spouse, but the keeper of a shared, dangerous secret. Any family argument spotlights one thought: this person can wreck my life with a single word. Gradually, fear moves into first place. By the mid-2010s, it is no longer clear what is really holding them together: feelings, habit, or fear of what would happen if they split up. Fear takes over first. By the middle of the 2010s, the marriage between Denise and Brian is finally falling apart. They start living almost separately, their communication reduced to fights. Denise, according to her lawyers, is ready for a divorce and is discussing it with her family. To Brian, this sounds like a direct threat. He understands perfectly well what is really keeping them together. He is convinced that if Denise leaves, sooner or later, she will use their shared secret against him. In court, in the divorce, during the division of property, anywhere. In August of the year 2016, the situation snaps. Brian Winchester ambushes Denise near her car and, at gunpoint, forces her to get inside. For some time he holds her against her will, speaks to her in a raised voice, lectures her that she has no right to turn him in. This is no longer a family quarrel. This is holding a person under the threat of a weapon. Denise manages to get away and go to the police. Brian is arrested. He is charged with serious offenses linked to unlawful detention and armed threatening. Under Florida law, this is not a minor episode. These are statutes that easily bring decades behind bars. For the first time in his life, Winchester is no longer a respected insurance agent from Tallahassee, but a man in handcuffs who is realistically facing a long prison term. This is where the situation flips. Up to this point, Brian had been protected by the secret he held together with Denise. The longer they both stayed silent, the safer he felt. Now, silence is no longer working in his favor. In prison for many years to come, there is no sense in guarding a secret that only benefits his ex-wife. On the contrary, that same secret can become a currency to trade with the prosecution. For an investigation that had spent 16 years only circling the Mike Williams case, this is the first real opening. The Leon County Prosecutor's Office starts quietly testing the ground. Brian's lawyers are given a hint. There may be a topic we are willing to discuss. What exactly he is ready to hand over in exchange for leniency is, for now, known only to him and his defense. In the year 2017, the negotiations are formalized into a deal. Brian Winchester agrees to tell everything he knows about the death of Mike Williams in exchange for immunity on that particular case. He has already, formally, received a long sentence for the episode involving Denise. Now, investigators get the most valuable thing of all, a confession in a case that for 16 years had been treated as an accident. Winchester describes the morning of December 16th, the year 2000, in detail. The boat, the weapon on board, the waiters and how Mike managed to get out of them in the water, and the final episode near the tree. He names the spot where the body was later moved, according to him, to the area of Lake Carr, not far from the same places. Investigators carry out thorough searches in the area he indicated, and for the first time in 17 years, they find what this whole story had been looking for: the remains of Mike Williams. The examination confirms the key detail. On the remains, there are signs of a gunshot wound. This is not an accident. This is not death in the water. This is a shot. The version of a hunter falling from a boat collapses in a single day. The alligators from the official picture vanish along with it. For the investigation and for Mike's mother, this is at once a shock and confirmation of what Roberta had been saying for 16 years. In his testimony, Winchester does not stop at himself. He names Denise as the second participant in the plan. In his version, it was the long conversations with her that led to the idea. He describes how, over the years, they discussed different scenarios, from a staged accident to a hunting trip. He lays out the role of the insurance policy in those conversations in detail, and he insists that the decision to go out to the lake on December 16th was a joint one. Immunity on the killing gives Brian a rare privilege. He can speak without fearing that his own confession will add to his sentence. That same immunity makes his testimony vulnerable. Where his truth ends and his self-interest begins is something the jury will still have to sort out. But for the prosecution, the main thing is in place. There is a body, there is a cause of death, and there is a man ready to give evidence. Holding a body, the forensic findings, and Winchester's testimony, the prosecution takes the next step. In May of the year 2018, Denise Williams is arrested outside her house in Tallahassee. For a city where she has lived her whole life, this becomes front-page news. A woman whom many had seen for years at church and in the supermarket parking lot is now heading to the precinct in handcuffs. She is charged with offenses connected to the death of her first husband, conspiracy, accessory involvement, and a role in what happened on Lake Seminole 18 years earlier. Denise does not plead guilty. From day one, her defense builds a line in which she is not a willing participant in the plan, but its victim. The attorneys argue that Brian Winchester is an obsessive man who for years controlled her, frightened her, pressured her, and in the end made the decision himself, while she knew nothing concrete about the lake scenario. The 2016 episode with the gun and the detention is used as an argument in her favor. Look, the defense says, this man is capable of abducting her at gunpoint in the year 2016. Why are you so sure that earlier she was controlling him, and not, on the contrary, under his pressure? The prosecution builds its case on several pillars. The first is Winchester's own testimony. The second is the history of the insurance policy. A huge sum, arranged specifically by Brian, specifically on Denise, specifically 6 months before the death. The third is Denise's behavior in the first hours and days after her husband went missing. Her minimal involvement in the search, her quiet answers, her subsequent relationship with Brian. The fourth is the long-running affair, for which there is now testimony. The trial itself takes place in December of the year 2018, almost exactly 18 years after that duck hunt. In the courtroom, old documents are read out, fresh recordings are played, the trip to the lake is reconstructed, the insurance payment schedules are laid out. Special attention is paid to the affair that had gone on for years before Mike's death. Among the listeners, Roberta Williams is always present. For her, this is not just another hearing. This is the finale of an 18-year personal fight. The question for the jury is put as plainly as possible: whether to believe the words of a killer against his former wife. The jury answers that question with a fair amount of confidence. In December of the year 2018, the panel finds Denise Williams guilty. The verdict records conspiracy to commit a crime, first-degree involvement in her husband's death, and assistance after the fact. For the small community of Tallahassee, this is a breakthrough. A woman who for 18 years had lived in the same town as her first husband's mother is now officially recognized as part of the plan behind his death. In February of the year 2019, the court hands down the sentence. Denise Williams receives life in prison. Brian Winchester, thanks to his deal with the investigation, ends up with a noticeably lighter outcome on this track. His main sentence is tied to the 2016 episode, Holding Denise at Gunpoint. On the case of Mike Williams' death, he is formally protected by immunity. For the public, this asymmetry looks questionable. The man who pulled the trigger is serving time for something else. The woman who, according to the prosecution, took part in the conspiracy receives a life term. For Mike Williams' family, the verdict becomes the first official acknowledgement of the truth. Roberta Williams walks out of the courthouse and publicly thanks the investigators, the jury, and the journalists who kept the case from disappearing. For her, this is one of those rare stories in which a mother's stubbornness literally changed judicial practice. Local politicians discuss how it could have happened that a case sat for 16 years without a proper investigation. American media call the story one of the longest cold cases in Florida. Major features are written about it. Episodes of shows on unsolved crimes are made. Detailed podcast series about court trials are recorded. Reporters dig into the role of the insurance policy, how the insurance company failed to notice the suspicious sum, why internal checks did not stop the deal, whether anything could have been spotted in advance. The case becomes a teaching example for investigators. In training materials, it takes its place alongside the classic stories about hunter husbands who disappear on the water. But the question of whether justice managed to put a final period on this story stays open. An appeal is coming, and it is the appeal that will once again shift the overall picture. That appeal comes in the year 2020. Denise Williams' defense pushes for a review of the verdict in the Florida District Court of Appeals. A panel of 3 judges carefully studies the materials and finds that part of the charges is not backed by sufficient evidence. The verdict is partly overturned. The charges of first-degree involvement in the death and of assistance after the fact are dropped. The key thing the judges say is this: the prosecution has not proven that Denise helped Winchester directly during the events on the lake. There are no traces of her at the scene, no proven actions on her part during those hours. But the central charge, conspiracy to commit a crime, stays in place. The court finds that the many years of conversations, the insurance policy, the affair, and the couple's subsequent behavior add up to a convincing picture of a plan that was thought out in advance. In the year 2021, Denise Williams is brought back for resentencing. Instead of life, she is given 30 years in prison. For the defense, this is a partial win. For Mike's family, the main outcome is preserved. She is still recognized as a participant in the plan, and she stays behind bars for many years to come. But some questions the appeal does not close. On the contrary, it shines an even brighter light on them. The main one is who exactly was the driving force behind the plan. By one version, Denise coldly manipulated an obsessed family friend using his feelings and his insurance know-how. By another, the decision was Winchester's, while her role was limited to silent agreement and taking part in the conversations. Both versions rest on the same facts and diverge only in interpretation. Winchester himself keeps insisting that the two of them bear equal responsibility. Denise keeps insisting she knew nothing about the details. The jury heard the first version. The appeals court softened its consequences. An answer that would satisfy everyone, in this case, is probably not coming. What remains is something else, a clear reminder that someone else's secret, even one neatly wrapped in an insurance policy and sealed by an official version, still cannot be kept for 18 years without a single trace. It is always found by the one who refuses to believe in it. A former ballerina, a swimsuit model, the founder of her own ballet company, and 4.45 caliber shell casings on the floor of her bedroom. On the 27th of September, 2020, in the suburb of Lakewood Ranch in Florida, Ashley Benefield uses a weapon against her own husband. He is a former Navy officer, 30 years her senior. She runs out to a neighbor barefoot and shouts one word: self-defense. 4 years later, prosecutors will show jurors her messages with her mother and call her an actress who played the role of a lifetime. Between those two versions, a 20-year sentence and one little daughter, for whose sake Both sides believe everything was set in motion. The 27th of September, 2020. The suburb of Lakewood Ranch on the west coast of Florida. A warm weekday evening, still light out. The sound of sprinklers drifting in from neighboring yards. In a one-story light-colored house on a quiet street, two figures are loading boxes into a rented trailer. The woman is slender, trim, 30 years old, moving with a ballerina's poise even under the weight of cardboard crates. The man is helping her. He is 58, nearly a head taller than she is. A former officer of the United States Navy, fit but already going gray. Their names are Ashley and Doug Benefield, and this is their shared home, the one she is moving out of. They have been married for 4 years and have been living apart for many months. They have a small daughter. A divorce is dragging along between them, long negotiations about property, and a schedule for visits with the child. Tonight, Doug has come over at her invitation to help pack the larger items and take his share. On the surface, it looks like the ordinary domestic finale of a long family story. Half an hour earlier, Ashley's mother, Alicia, left the house. She took her granddaughter and drove her to a nearby park. The couple stayed in the house alone. Around 7 in the evening, the neighbors, through open windows, hear an argument starting inside. Raised voices, muffled thuds, then several quick pops that sound like gunshots. A minute later, Ashley runs out onto the porch, barefoot, with a phone in her hand. She knocks on her neighbor's door and says that she shot her husband. The arriving paramedics find Doug on the floor of the bedroom. He has 2 wounds. The second turns out to be the most serious. Next to him, 4 spent shell casings. An hour later, Doug dies in the hospital. Ashley keeps repeating the same word to the police: self-defense. Investigators still have to figure out what actually happened behind the closed door of that bedroom, and whether her story holds up on the facts or falls apart at the first serious question. To understand this tale of self-defense, it's worth rewinding the tape 30 years back, to a quiet town on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. Ashley Christina Byers was born on the 5th of December, 1991, in Annapolis, Maryland. An ordinary family, not wealthy, but ambitious. The parents want their daughter to grow up, not just as a polite girl, but as a person with a calling. At the age of 8, they enroll her in ballet. Her first classes are at a small county school, and the child literally sticks to the bar. She gets noticed in the hallways for her straight back and her calm, almost stubborn gaze. She quickly outgrows the local studios and is accepted into the Maryland Youth Ballet, one of the most prestigious teen schools on the East Coast. There she is selected again, this time for a program at the Kennedy Center. Her teachers are soloists of American Ballet Theater and the New York City Ballet, names that would make any schoolgirl swoon. As a teenager, Ashley already tells her mother that she doesn't just want to dance. She wants one day to lead her own company, not to perform, to build. After graduation, the grown-up and not always kind, work begins. She dances with the Baltimore Ballet, then with the Ballet Theater of Maryland, then moves down the coast. Sarasota Ballet, Ballet Pensacola. Decent stages, decent parts, but never the lead. Her career runs evenly, and evenly is the quiet curse of ballet. No flops, no fame. In parallel, she finds another source of attention. Ashley moonlights as a swimsuit model, shoots for catalogs, appears in advertising sessions on the beaches of Florida. The camera loves her. So does social media. By her mid-20s, she settles on the southwest coast of Florida. She looks for stable work, tries different things. In the summer of 2016, she takes a job at Donald Trump's campaign office in Sarasota. Routine, phone calls, folders, printouts. Sometimes she's placed in the front row at rallies to warm up the crowd. Striking, smiling, photogenic. It is this very job that, within a few weeks, will bring her together with the man whose life will end exactly 4 years later, in their own bedroom. It's through that work, through crowds and microphones and flags, that her path crosses with Doug Benefield. August 2016, an event in Palm Beach. He is 54, she is 24. A 30-year age gap, the detail that every trial, every lawyer on both sides will later keep repeating. Doug is a recognizable figure in his own circles, a former officer of the United States Navy, now working in the field of defense contracts, living in Charleston, South Carolina. Well-groomed, confident, with a deep voice, and the kind of masculine charm that's easy to trust at the first handshake. Ashley herself will later admit That evening, she had a small pistol tucked into her bodice, a safety measure she would later speak about with pride. The courtship begins instantly and moves with the force of a hurricane. Phone calls, gifts, trips, long late-night conversations, promises of a joint venture. He promises not just to be by her side. He promises to help her build the things she has dreamed of since she was 8, her own ballet company. He has connections. He has management experience. He seems to have the resources. 13 days after they meet, they get married, in his hometown of Charleston. No engagement, no big ceremony. An almost impulsive decision on the threshold of a new phase of her life. Relatives and friends on both sides stay silent at the wedding. Years later, they will tell journalists almost identical things. That speed alone was already a warning sign. But in that moment, they are full of plans. And these plans are not only about family, they are joint, professional, ambitious. Ashley sees in Doug a co-investor in her dream. Doug sees in Ashley the face of a big project that will place his name in the cultural row of the East Coast. A few months later, that dream will turn into a public failure. And the first real crack in their marriage will run not through domestic life, not through jealousy, but through the ballet bar and the empty rehearsal hall in the South. That failure comes with a loud name and nationwide scope. In 2017, the couple announces the creation of the American National Ballet, headquartered in Charleston. The plan is announced like a campaign speech, a world-class company, diverse casting, a permanent program, a new cultural landmark on the map of the United States. Ashley becomes the artistic director, Doug, the executive director, and the main driving force behind the deal. Through spring and summer, about 40 dancers from around the planet, from Europe to Asia, receive invitations and sign contracts. They are promised salaries, housing, paid studios, paid relocation, a full season with a full repertoire. For many, it is the long-awaited chance to leave small companies, endless auditions, to land in a big American project. The first signs of trouble appear almost immediately. Delayed payments, confusion over schedules, unpaid invoices from costume vendors and the hall rental. Employees begin to whisper among themselves, something is wrong. And then comes the moment they all cross the ocean for, the first rehearsal. And at that moment, the artistic director is simply not in the studio. Ashley doesn't show up, not that day, not the next. Doug steps out in front of the gathered dancers and announces that his wife is confined to bed because of a difficult pregnancy and will not be able to lead the season anytime soon. For dancers who have uprooted their lives and come to a strange city, it's a catastrophe. No paychecks, no work. Contracts hanging in the air. A scandal erupts in the local press. Then federal outlets pick it up. Charleston journalists write features about the abandoned company. Lawyers assemble class action suits. The company effectively shuts down without putting on a single full season. Accusations rain down on the Benefields of incompetent management, of defrauding the dancers, of squandering sponsors' funds. The reputation they built in 13 days and then a year collapses in a couple of months. For Ashley, this is more than the failure of a project. It is the collapse of her main life plan. Instead of glory, she gets debts, ridicule, and a hard pregnancy against a backdrop of a slowly freezing marriage. The first serious crack in the marriage ran right through the rehearsal hall. That crack turns into distance. While her husband is under siege from journalists and creditors in Charleston, Ashley is quietly battling her own condition. The pregnancy is hard, with complications. She decides to leave, for Florida, for the town of Bradenton, where her mother Alicia lives. There the family is ready to help. A room, care, doctors nearby, the calm rhythm of the suburbs. By this point, her vocabulary is also shifting. In conversations with her mother, her friends, her therapist, she begins for the first time to talk about her husband differently. Not my Doug, but he's pressuring me. He's controlling. I'm afraid. Alicia logs this in messages, her friends in phone conversations. Ashley's accounts grow darker as the pregnancy advances. Doug learns of this secondhand and flatly denies everything. In his own letters, he writes to acquaintances. She is pulling away, turning mutual friends against him, and all of it, he believes, is in order to take the future child away. He hires a lawyer, even before the birth. Shortly before the daughter is born, Ashley files a petition in court for a temporary restraining order. It's a serious step. Such a document can bar a father from approaching his wife and newborn. The court examines the evidence, the messages, the witness statements, the medical records, and makes its decision. The order is denied. The judge rules that the materials submitted are not enough to deem Doug a threat. It becomes a painful loss for Ashley and an important card for Doug. In 2018, a baby girl is born. From that minute on, the child lands at the center of a long legal war. According to Doug, in the first months, the wife refuses to let him see his daughter despite his requests. He turns again to lawyers and obtains a visitation schedule through family court. Investigators will later find, in their correspondence from that period, tender messages and cold, almost businesslike messages about the child, and sharp, almost hostile phrases. The picture of the relationship becomes contradictory. Where the truth is, where the calculation is, where the fatigue is, and where the performance is. All of that will have to be decided, 6 years later, by 12 jurors in a stifling courtroom in Manatee County. While the lawyers and jurors are still ahead, in the Benefield's real life, another final turn is coming. By the beginning of 2020, the couple formally lives apart. Different addresses, different bank accounts, different lives, but they don't cut off contact entirely. The daughter is growing, and her father has to appear in the family's life regularly. Doug insists on that time stubbornly and periodically shows up at Ashley's home in Lakewood Ranch. In the spring of 2020, a pandemic descends on Florida, as on the rest of the country. Schools are closed, resorts empty out, two-bedroom houses become offices, nurseries and gyms all at once. Against that backdrop of isolation, the spouses try something unexpected. They attempt to move back in together, for their daughter's sake, as they tell both families. For stability's sake, for some semblance of a normal life in a world where everything is unstable. The reconciliation doesn't last long, just a few months, and falls apart by the end of summer. They start quarreling again, and the old scripts repeat themselves. In messages to her mother and closest friends, Ashley once again complains about control, about heavy evenings, about his outbursts. Doug, in his messages, as a mirror, writes that his wife manipulates him and uses the child as leverage. By September of 2020, it becomes obvious. The second attempt has failed. The separation is final, and this time everything has to be divided. The furniture, the documents, the habits. Ashley plans her move, rents a trailer, arranges with her mother to take the granddaughter out of the house on the day the man will be there. Doug is invited to come on the 27th of September to pick up his share of the belongings, to help with the larger furniture, to say goodbye to the house. On the surface, the situation looks banal. Tired adults, tired lawyers, a shared child, an ordinary Saturday move in an American suburb. But at the same time, on Ashley's phone, and as will turn out later, on her mother's phone, messages are piling up that the prosecution will call the key evidence in the case. In those messages, if the investigation is to be believed, it isn't the move that's being discussed. What's being discussed is a way to get rid of Doug. And there are only a few days left until the last evening in the Lakewood Ranch house. Those days turn out to be fewer than would be needed for a second attempt at reconciliation. What the 27th of September, 2020, looks like through Ashley's eyes, she herself recounted in detail for more than an hour in the Manatee County courtroom. According to her, the evening begins calmly. They load boxes, agree on who takes what. Then everything goes off the rails. A word dropped about the daughter, about the visitation schedule, about the child's future, and Doug, in her version, turns once again into the man she had been afraid of for years. He raises his voice. He doesn't let her leave the room. She claims that at some point he struck her on the head, that he wouldn't let her out, that she seriously decided she was in real danger. Nearby in the dresser, her personal .45 caliber pistol. She uses the weapon, according to her, without looking, in panic, trying to stop an assault. After the shots, she runs out of the house. Barefoot, phone in hand, she runs to the neighbors. On the body camera footage of the first arriving officer, she can be seen trembling, crying, speaking quickly, but repeating one word: self-defense. She will keep repeating that word for the next 4 years. The defense at trial builds an entire construction around this version. Psychologists, specialists in behavior during long-term conflicts, statements from friends and colleagues. All of it is meant to convince the jurors. Before them stands not a calculating woman, but a burned-out, cornered victim in whom a reflex kicked in. The lawyers stress the age gap, 30 years. The difference in physical strength, a naval officer versus a slender ballerina who weighs 120 pounds. The difference in experience, he handles weapons in close combat professionally. She is an amateur with a household pistol. It is precisely because of this version, a fragile, trembling dancer against a strong man, that the press quickly slaps the case with the label Black Swan after the film with Natalie Portman. From that moment on, Ashley stops being just a defendant and becomes a public figure. From a public figure, in the eyes of the prosecution, she turns into something else. The prosecutors step before the jurors with their own version of that same evening, and in it, little remains of the fragile ballerina. Doug comes to the house unarmed. He arrives at her invitation to help with the move. He brings nothing with him but his car keys and his phone. The cameras on neighboring homes show him stepping out of the car, calmly, without fuss, without aggression. He walks inside with her, helps load boxes. What happens next is reconstructed by forensic experts. 4 .45 caliber shell casings from Ashley's pistol are found on the scene. That means 4 shots were fired. Of those 4, 2 hit Doug. The rest went into the walls and furniture. Ballistics experts assessed the trajectory. The decisive shot came from the side, at an angle, not head-on. From the nature of the wounds, they draw a conclusion. At the moment of the shots, the husband was not facing his wife. He was either turning away, or moving to the side, or trying to leave. Paramedics examine Ashley herself right after the incident. Only superficial scratches. No bruises matching her description of heavy blows to the head. No signs of strangulation. No serious injuries confirming her account. The signs of a struggle in the bedroom are evaluated by the forensic team with skepticism. In their view, the picture in the room does not match the dramatic scene the defendant describes. The prosecution insists this is not defense, but shooting a man who is turning or walking away. And the motive, in their view, lies not in the last quarrel, but much deeper, in years of battle over custody of the daughter. Doug, for Ashley, is the main obstacle on the way to sole custody. While he is alive, he legally remains the father and guardian. The early court filings and unsuccessful restraining orders the prosecutors present as groundwork. And in their story, Ashley gradually transforms from a cornered wife into an actress who had everything calculated in advance. These calculations and schemes take on flesh in the evidence that will become the main sensation of the trial. The pivotal turn of the hearings is Ashley's correspondence with her mother, Alicia Byers. Investigators gain access to the messages on both phones. Technical experts recover deleted fragments, the ones that, according to the case file, Ashley and Alicia tried to erase after the incident. The volume of messages is enormous, months of correspondence, thousands of fragments. The prosecution highlights several dozen of the key ones. In those messages, according to the official version of the prosecution, ways are discussed to remove Doug from the lives of Ashley and her granddaughter, not in the sense of finalizing the divorce or restricting his rights to the child, but in the sense of erasing him from the picture of their lives altogether. In the correspondence, according to the prosecution's version, ways are discussed of provoking the husband into aggression so that the situation would later look like self-defense. In some messages, scenarios are brought up in which the husband would stop being a problem for good. The jurors are shown these fragments on a large screen, printed out in large type. The defense attacks the correspondence from different angles. The lawyers insist that the messages have been torn out of the context of many years of fear and of a mother's support. Mother and daughter spent years writing to each other about how hard it was, how to escape the control, about possible ways to disappear themselves rather than to remove the husband. In their version, the prosecutors selected only the fragments that sound effective, but the jurors see something else in the messages. They see how the language of the correspondence gradually shifts, from complaints to concrete plans, from abstract "if only he would disappear" to discussion of scenarios. And then comes the most uncomfortable coincidence. On the day of the move, the 27th of September, It is precisely Alicia who takes the granddaughter to the park, precisely at the hour when Doug is left in the house one-on-one with her daughter. This coincidence the prosecution uses as indirect confirmation. Mother and daughter synchronize that evening. No formal charges are brought against Alicia, but her name will remain in this case forever. That name, those messages, that evening, all of it ends up in one courtroom on the 23rd of July, 2024, when the trial begins in Manatee County. By that point, the case is no longer a local story. The attention of the whole country is fixed on it. The hearings are broadcast live on Court TV, a channel specializing in high-profile trials. Their coverage is watched by millions. Videos with fragments of testimony end up on TikTok and YouTube, racking up hundreds of thousands of views within hours. The media quickly tagged the case Black Swan Murder, after the 2010 film with Natalie Portman about a ballerina who gradually loses the line between reality and a role. At the center of attention, Ashley herself, her balletic posture, her tears appearing precisely where it's logical, her polished speech, in which one can hear work with lawyers and, as journalists claim, a bit of acting school. She chooses a strategy that is rare for a defendant, to testify in person, under oath. Normally, lawyers don't recommend this. Cross-examination can destroy even a strong alibi, but the defense believes the jurors need to see a living Ashley, not as a photograph on a screen, but as a person in the room. For hours, she talks about control, fear, humiliation, about that very last quarrel. The prosecutor on cross-examination works coldly and methodically. He compares her testimony with her earlier interviews, with recordings from the therapist's office, with her own statements in family courts, and he catches her, one time after another, in contradictions. Small ones, but accumulating. In the hallways, journalists note her rehearsed gestures, pauses, tears appearing at key moments. Articles begin to appear about the role of a lifetime. Some people genuinely believe her, some see theater. The defense calls psychologists, friends, former colleagues, and neighbors. The prosecution puts on the stand detectives, ballistics experts, former employees of the collapsed ballet company ready to speak about her character. The trial turns into a confrontation of two storylines: trauma against calculation, defensive panic against cold play. Which of the two, the jurors believe, determines her life? This belief is being formed in a room closed to the cameras. After 6 days of hearings, the jurors retire to deliberate on the 30th of July, 2024. They spend more than 6 hours there, which for a case of this profile is considered a long stretch. The courtroom waits. Doug's relatives sit holding his photographs and military awards in their hands. Ashley's family stays together. Alicia, stone-faced. Initially, Ashley was charged with second-degree murder of her husband, a statute under which she could have faced life imprisonment. But the jurors choose a softer wording. They find her guilty of manslaughter with the use of a firearm. Such a decision is a compromise. It means that the 12 jurors did not believe in pure self-defense, nor in fully cold-blooded calculation. They saw something in between, an emotional eruption that nevertheless cannot be justified as defense, a shooting in which there was too much to think about before the first shot. When the judge reads out the verdict, Ashley loses her composure for a few seconds. She covers her face with her hands. Her chin trembles. For the first time during the trial, her ballerina's posture fails her. Her lawyer places a hand on her shoulder. Doug's relatives listen in silence. His adult daughter from his first marriage, the one who knew Ashley back at the very beginning of their story, lowers her head and cries silently, only with her eyes. The couple's shared daughter, by that time, is living with her grandparents on her father's side. She is not told about the verdict right away, and not in the language of the court. For the prosecution, it is an incomplete but still a victory. The court has acknowledged the defense version did not stand up to the facts. For the defense, also a partial success. The client avoided a life sentence. She walked out with a chance that one day she would be free again. But that chance is still far off. The main question, how many years she will spend behind bars, is decided at the next stage. The court schedules separate sentencing hearings. Before them, she has a few months of a special form of freedom and a little time to pull herself together. That time turns out to be both not enough and too much. The sentencing hearings take place in the late fall and winter of 2024. They stretch across several sessions in order to hear everyone who wants to say a final word. Doug's relatives speak at them. His brother talks about his service in the Navy, about military deployments, about a man who at 58 had no intention of retiring and was only beginning a new chapter of his life. His adult daughter from the first marriage speaks briefly and sharply. He loved his little girl. She needed him. Former employees of the collapsed ballet company, even those who had sued the Benefields, come forward to say that Doug, unlike Ashley, tried to pay at least some of the dancers out of his own funds. On the defendant's side are other faces in the courtroom: psychologists, friends, her own mother, Alicia. They describe Ashley as a traumatized young woman who needs therapy, not prison. They speak about her little daughter, about her ballet, about her years of fear. On the 3rd of December, 2024, Judge Hugo Hyatt delivers the final decision: 20 years of actual time in Florida State Prison. After serving the main sentence, 10 years of probation with restrictions on firearms, on contact with the victim's family, and on travel, the maximum term under this statute could have reached 30 years, the minimum significantly lower. The judge picks a high but not top bar. He says openly in the reasoning, the degree of premeditation in the actions and the nature of the testimony in court do not allow him to impose less. The defense immediately announces plans for an appeal. The lawyers will challenge both the weighing of the testimony, the admissibility of certain fragments of the correspondence, and the jury verdict itself. In the courtroom, Ashley once again cries and asks for mercy, speaking about her little daughter. But for the 12 jurors and for the judge, her daughter has long ceased being simply a child in this case. For many years, the girl has been an argument. In restraining orders, in family proceedings, in the correspondence with the mother, and now in the final word. As an argument, she remains too, after the sentence. The girl herself is the main person whose life is now rebuilt forever. After the verdict, Doug and Ashley's daughter stays under the guardianship of relatives on her father's side. Her name the court seals, her photographs are forbidden in the press and on social media. They try to shield her from the flood of attention that accompanies her mother's case. Alicia Byers, Ashley's mother, never receives a formal charge of being an accomplice. The prosecution weighs the prospects and decides there is not enough evidence specifically of complicity in the shooting. But her reputation in Bradenton and Sarasota is destroyed. Neighbors in Lakewood Ranch will give interviews to documentaries for years about that Saturday evening, about Alicia's car that drove out of the yard an hour before the pops. The American National Ballet remains a closed page. The company is never revived. Not a single serious investor is ready to tie their name to the Benefields. The dancers who in 2017 uprooted their lives for the project spend years in litigation against the remaining legal shell of the firm and win partial compensation. Ashley's former colleagues at Sarasota Ballet and Ballet Pensacola refuse to comment on her name in the press. For Florida's professional ballet community, this is a topic best left untouched. Too many raw nerves for everyone. Doug's family founds a memorial fund in his name. The fund is tied to supporting Navy veterans and military families. At the first annual gathering in Charleston, his brother speaks. A Dateline documentary project airs in 2026 under the title Deadly Dance. It becomes one of the most watched episodes of the season. Court TV reissues the full archive of the hearings as a teaching case for law schools, with an analysis of the strategies of the defense and the prosecution. On book platforms, several true crime books based on the trial materials appear. One of them, written by a local journalist from Manatee, spends months on the regional bestseller charts. The case becomes one of the most discussed women's trials in the United States in the mid-20s. Ashley Benefield, from a living human being, turns into a cultural symbol. That symbol lives longer than her 20 years will last. Ashley Benefield's story steps beyond the private tragedy of two people and one family. It touches a sore nerve of American justice, the line between defense and calculation, between victim and perpetrator. Lawyers who specialize in defending victims of domestic conflicts debate the verdict for a long time. Some of them fear that a high-profile conviction of a beautiful, educated, public woman may strike at those who actually endure threats for years and seek the court's protection. If the jurors did not believe Ashley, will they stop believing others? the prosecutors answer differently. It is precisely cases like this, they say, that make the defense of real victims convincing. The system must tell one from the other, or trust in all such trials will collapse. The court shows how easily a hearing room can be turned into a stage, and how dangerous it is to believe that stage. It also shows something else. Even the most private correspondence, even deleted messages, even closed chats with your mom can one day become the main material of a criminal case. Technical examination recovers almost everything. Experts in family law debate how, in the future, evidence of fear and threats should be evaluated. How to distinguish real anxiety from its imitation in messages. How to account for the difference between what a person writes in despair and what they actually plan. Police academies use the case as an example of work in a one-on-one situation. There are no witnesses. There are only two people, one of whom speaks and the other of whom is silent forever. And it is precisely in cases like these that an investigative mistake can cost very dearly, in either direction. For viewers of true crime content, Ashley will remain an image in which ballerina beauty intertwined with cold. For Doug's family, a story of how a love at first sight turned into loss and a long trial. For Ashley herself, what lies ahead are long years in a Florida state prison, meetings with lawyers, appeals, possible reviews, and a new life without a stage, without a company, and without her daughter nearby. The Black Swan case is closed by a verdict, but the questions about the truth of that Saturday evening in Lakewood Ranch, who exactly cornered whom first, remain open.